have our recorder. We're all set. Okay. I'll call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, March 30th, 2021. First item of business tonight would be a roll call.
Miller?
Here.
Rosado?
Here.
Beck? Here. Knock?
Here.
Chanzit? Barron?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
O'Brien?
Here.
Callahan?
Here.
Meitzler?
Here.
Malay? Ewer?
Here.
Cerrone? I see him as an attendee, so I'll mark him as attending. And McFadden. We have 11 out of 14.
I did get an email earlier that
Nick Cerrone is here.
Got it.
we heard you, Nick. It was going in the background. All right, then a reminder to please speak directly into whatever microphone you happen to be using this evening for the broadcast and for the recording for the rebroadcast of this meeting. Do we have any items to be removed, added, or changed this evening?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Next up would be item number 4, matters from the public for items not on the agenda. Do we have anybody online that wants to talk about anything?
If you are attending online and you would like to speak on a matter which is not on the agenda, if you raise your hand, I can activate your microphone. I've got a list of 16 attendees, so allow me to scroll down here. No, we do not have anyone with their hand raised.
Okay, next up would be the consent agenda. One item on there is approval of the COW executive session minutes for February 9th, 2021. Anybody have any comments or corrections or anything on that? If not, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by O'Brien, second by Miller. Roll call, please.
O'Brien?
Aye.
Callahan?
Hey.
Meitzler?
Aye.
Malay? Ewer?
Aye.
Cerrone?
Aye.
McFadden? Miller?
Aye.
Rosado?
Aye.
Beck? Aye. Knock?
Aye.
Chanzit? Barron?
Aye.
And Wolf?
Aye.
Motion carried 11-0.
All right, thank you. Next up would be item number 6, which is an approval of a B1 package sales liquor license application for AA Suman Incorporated, doing business as R&S Liquors at 415 East Wilson Street.
I'm signing off, Alan.
Okay. Record reflect that Alderman Beck has left the meeting. Okay. Who do we, is it Chief Autenreith here tonight? Is that who?
Glenn Autenreith is here, Deputy Chief.
Deputy Chief? Glenn?
I'm on.
Did you have anything you wanted to say on this background check?
Everything, nothing remarkable showed up,
Okay.
and nothing stood out. And as noted in Chief Ewell's memo to the council dated March 24th, he would recommend moving forward with an approval for a B1 liquor license.
And this is just a change of ownership, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Does anybody have any questions, comments about it? If not, I'll make the motion that we recommend the City Council approval of a Class B1 package liquor sales license application for AA Suman Incorporated, doing business as R&S Liquor.
Second.
Motion by Wolf, second by O'Brien. Roll call, please.
Wolf?
Aye.
O'Brien?
Aye.
Callahan?
Aye.
Meitzler?
Aye.
Malay, absent. Ewer,
Aye.
Saron,
Aye.
McFadden, absent. Miller,
Aye.
Rosado,
Aye.
Beck, absent. Knopf,
Aye.
Chanzit, absent. And Barron.
Aye.
Did I hear Chanzit or am I hearing things?
Yep, I made it a little bit late. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Glad I'm not hearing voices. Okay, so we have motion carried 11-0.
Okay. And now we'll move on to item number 7, which is Resolution 21-29-R.
Can I just clarify with the clerk that with Dan Chanzit voting, was it 12 of 14?
11,
It's 11? Okay.
because Alderman Beck is not there.
Thank you.
Yep. And that, just so anybody that's watching this understands, it's because Alderman Beck is going to have a liquor license or have an application for liquor license for a business in town. So anything that's to do with a liquor license, she would not participate in the discussion. And that's why she's left the meeting and then will return for this next one. Sometimes I think we all know that, but it's good to probably let the public know that.
Exactly.
Okay, then we will move on to item number 7, which is Resolution 21-29-R, consideration of an application for grant funds offered through the city's downtown signage assistance program to Lighten Pine Collective, 222 East Wilson Street, in the amount of $995.34. Alderman Callahan, you have this?
I do, thank you. Yep, as stated, this is a application under the Downtown Signage Assistance Program for Lighten Pine Collective at 222 East Wilson to receive an amount totaling $995.34, which is 50% of the actual improvement costs. They can receive up to $1,000, but that's the lesser amount. This is a normal funded item out of the TIF, and great use of funds for several businesses that started just in this past year. Any questions?
Alderman Callahan.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you, sir. I just want to make mention that this project has not gone in front of HPC, but staff will be working diligently to get the approval through the HPC so that we can move forward with this. But that is something that we'll be working on in a timely manner.
And looking at the proposed signage, that's actually pretty consistent to what used to be there when it used to be the old Music Matters. It was something similar to that, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I know it would look better than the current vinyl sign that is taking a little bit of wind battering and drive more people to those shops. Does anybody else have any questions or anything for Anthony?
I do. What TIF district is this in?
I believe this is in new TIF number 6.
Okay.
This would be TIF number 6, the newly created TIF.
Okay. So that TIF has been newly created then?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have a question. These are businesses that were formerly of the Batavia boardwalk shops.
Yes, they were.
So I just wanted to comment that, the success of the shops is proven right here, how well they're doing.
Absolutely.
We're adding 2 more shops to the little park there.
Yes.
So-
And the building is owned by Michael Marconi, and he made a significant investment in the interior build out. If you've visited the 3 shops that are located in this building, they're really just lovely.
Excellent. Well, good source of funds.
Exactly.
Anyone else have anything? So I would recommend approval to City Council, Resolution 21-029-R, a resolution awarding a grant under the Downtown Signage Assistant Grant Program within the Downtown District for Lighten Pine Collective at 222 East Wilson in the amount of $995.34.
Second, Saron.
Motion by Callahan, second by, I believe it was Saron.
Thank you all.
Roll call, please.
Callahan?
Aye.
Meitzler?
Aye.
Malay absent? Ewer?
Aye.
Saron?
Aye.
McFadden absent? Miller?
Aye.
Rosato?
Aye.
Beck?
Aye.
Knopf?
Aye.
Kansas?
Aye.
Barron?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
And O'Brien?
Aye.
Motion carried 12-0.
All right, thank you.
Alan, we can put that on consent.
Sure, okay. That'll go on consent then. And we could probably do that with a liquor license too, unless the applicant wants to be here to talk
I
about
think we can
anything.
just put it on consent, and if the gentleman is here,
Yeah,
then maybe we let
move it. Okay, sure.
have him speak afterwards.
Okay. The next item is item 8, which is a discussion on the Clean Energy Jobs Act legislation. Alderman O'Brien, you want to start?
I'm going to let Gary Holm, I'll punt it to him to get it going, get it started. And then I guess after that, we'll probably speak with the advocates for the legislation itself.
Sure.
Thank you, Alderman. I wanted to start just by covering a couple of topics that came out of last week's COW meeting and council requested additional information on. First one was the cost impact to the city of Batavia, and I did disseminate this out, and I'll kind of walk through it tonight for everyone's benefit. I wanted to double check, and I spent some time today doing it, and I'm going to start with the third item down as opposed to the top. The Energy Community Reinvestment Fee, essentially under CEJA, it's a carbon tax. It's calculated based on fossil fuel generation, and it's updated every 3 months, so based on generation. The fee would be a direct cost to Prairie State, which of course then would be a direct cost to Nimpa and subsequently to our ratepayers here in Batavia. The dollar value that I have shown there actually is Batavia's proportional share. That's the bill that we would receive ourselves. So, like I said, as I started, I said I needed to double check today because this item is referenced in tonight's presentation. And so I jumped into section 20-70, and this is 906 pages long. I'm not going to go through all 906 pages, but I did want to go through these couple pages. This is the Energy Community Reinvestment Fund. The second paragraph is interesting in that it says the intent of the General Assembly is that this fund should be able to be used to pay for all the programs. And the last sentence says, and that no additional charge is borne by the taxpayers or ratepayers of Illinois, absent a deficiency. So that's the intent of the General Assembly, but that's not how it actually would impact us. I jumped over to the available funding, and if I add up items 1 through 9, I can come up with the $210 million that's referenced in tonight's presentation. Item number 10 is, it says that for the initial capital funding of the Clean Energy Jobs and Justice Fund, another $100 million should be provided in the year 2022 or staged in future years, several years, as quickly as feasible. That $100 million is not accounted for. And then if I jump to the next section altogether, item number D, it says that the projected revenue and spending need, so the spending revenue and spending need for this program identified for any year shall be no less than $400 million per year for the calendar years 2021 through 2025 and $200 million per year for all calendar years starting in 2026 that the Illinois electric sector continues to generate greenhouse gas. So I'm going to take one step back. I mean, obviously Prairie State generates greenhouse gas, so this fee would be applicable to Prairie State. The way I read the legislation, item number D, basically says that the EPA and the Department of Commerce and Economic Development have to work together. And then there's a minimum essentially set here that says shall be no less than 400 million per year for the calendar years 21 through 25, and then 200 million after that. So based on that value, the 400 million, based on Prairie State's 2019 output, and I double checked today on the 2020 output, is how I got to the cost that I gave in the memo to you. So I stand by that cost based on my reading of the legislation. I do not believe that the 210 million really encompasses everything that's in the legislation. It does say, interestingly, going back to this list, it does say item number 11, if the programs identified in 1 through 10, which are the ones I just went through, if they're all fully funded, and the department reasonably predicts that they will remain funded, then the Department of Commerce and Economic Development, shall transfer all surplus funds back to the general fund. So, in other words, those of us who are paying into this are basically going to send money back to Illinois' general fund, which in my mind is a tax, but I don't know. So anyways, that's that section, and I wanted to only focus on that because that's the largest value on my list to you.
And Gary, you also had a conversation with someone else in the industry who confirmed the accuracy of your estimated cost here too.
That's correct.
As well.
What also is not accounted for is the coal severance fee. That's a fee that would have to be paid by individuals extracting coal from the earth. Batavia's direct cost, our portion, would be $300,000 to $500,000 annually. And then finally, the other one cost that I was able to identify had to do with renewables, and that's a little more complicated to explain, but I'll try and make it quick. We have a fixed power contract with Nimpa right now for 55 megawatts. That's 24/7, 365. According to the Signage legislation, they would like to make municipals subject to the same renewable portfolio standard that the industrial-owned utilities are subject to, which is a whole separate set of issues there because we're not regulated by the ICC or the Public Utilities Act. But those technicalities aside, if we have to meet the renewable standards, I listed on the spreadsheet that I provided to you the percentages and the years on the left-hand side. Then I basically assumed our load never grows, which in reality our load has been decreasing, so I just kept it level. And then I took those percentages to say how much renewables we'd have to purchase. Then in order to come up with a cost, I actually used the wind and solar costs referenced in the RMI report, because for lack of a better information, I figured that was a good starting place. They have a chart in there which shows the decrease in those costs over the years. So I just used that chart to come up with the costs over the years. And then according to the legislation, it starts, I believe it's May 1st, 2022. So starting May 1st, 2022 is when we would begin to incur costs. And I put the costs in here for you of the actual energy that we'd have to purchase. What we're going to do with that energy is basically turn around and sell it back into the market because we do not need excess energy. So it's just a market transaction for us. But in order to get that energy, we're going to need to transact with someone, and that someone is going to expect that we pay something for market risk because they're going to be selling us, and they're not going to assume all the risk themselves. We're going to pay market risk. And that someone isn't going to do this out of the kindness of their heart. They're going to expect a profit. So jumping 10 plus years ago when we used to transact in the market, there was always a $1 per megawatt adder over the wholesale cost to account for these things. I just chose $5 a megawatt. It might be $2, it might be $6. It's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you actually get it to us. I don't know what that dollar value is exactly. I put on my memo to you somewhere between $400,000 and $900,000 over the years. And I think that's a good ballpark. So, those are the three things I actually can quantify: the coal severance fee, the renewables, and the carbon tax. And those alone would equate to about a 15% rate increase for our ratepayers. Those alone. Then there are several unknowns that are direct impacts to Batavia. The Signage legislation as written would allow our customers to self-generate with no limitations. We just spoke of a large industrial customer who wanted to come in and put, I think, almost 7 megawatts of power on their roof. If they would have done that, that's 7 megawatts of power that all other customers would have had to pay for, because that cost just shifts onto our other customers because we have a fixed amount of power that we purchase. So not having limitations or not having local control over that would impact all of our ratepayers. I spoke about this at the Green Night Out, and that is that a significant infrastructure investment is going to be required. That's across the state and the nation. Ultimately, those costs are going to roll down to Batavia in the form of transmission, congestion, and other charges on our PJM bill. Prairie State's going to be required to provide health insurance for all plant and mine employees who lose their jobs. These costs would be passed directly through to all owners. Prairie State would be required to maintain retirement account portfolios for all plant and mine employees who lose their jobs. Again, passed through to all owners, including Nimpa and Batavia. Signage legislation would enable utilities within PJM to procure capacity requirements using FRR. And I've done several emails to City Council on this. This is the Mopar issue. This is where the renewable industry would like to receive tax incentives from government bodies, the state. They'd like to get those tax incentives, which will lower their costs artificially. Then they can bid into the market at a lower cost and kind of get benefits on both ends of that equation. It went through FERC, and FERC ruled that PJM was proper in its setting up of its auction. Anyways, there's an option to do an alternative auction, and that's what Signage would allow for. That's going to directly impact Batavia in the form of PJM capacity market prices. And then finally, another direct cost to Batavia, but not included and not directly part of the legislation, but it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. The RMI analysis indicates that cost savings for Batavia could definitely be achieved through energy efficiency and demand response programs, except the percentages listed in RMI's report would require formal programs with formal outreach, there have to be fairly robust programs. We do not have any personnel, we don't have any administrative assistance, we don't have any vendor assistance to actually be able to implement those programs. So that would all be cost to the utility in order to implement those programs. Then I have multiple indirect impacts to all Illinois residents, and I'm not going to go through all these, but these are all the tax credits and income tax incentives, which really are paid by all of us. And I know the proponents say that everyone's costs are going to go down, but if you look at the big picture, we're all paying for these things. These are all incentives that as taxpayers we have to pay for. So that's cost impacts. I'll stop there. I've got two more things that you guys asked for, but I'll stop there right now for any questions on the costs.
Okay, any questions for Gary?
Mike?
Go ahead, Marty.
Gary, would it be possible if we could just kind of break it down into just a simplistic memo or a simplistic point of view? There may be some residents tonight that are joining this that might not know what Signage is, where the legislation is, it federal, is it state? Can we give a kind of synopsis of what the legislation is and why this is important?
Sure, I can get Signage 101 put together.
I guess to me the question that I have is the people really need to know that all of these unintended, or not unintended, but all these very consequential costs that are going to show up if this bill goes through the way it is to the city of Batavia, to every other municipality, to every other owner group that's part of Prairie State, even including entities outside the state of Illinois, will be impacted by this Illinois law that, you know, they really, to me, at this point, have shown no data that shows how any of that cost comes back other than the ratepayers have to pick it up. I mean, I have not heard anybody say that, okay, this is going to be part of legislation out of the federal government and, you know, this $100 million every year that they're going to need to be able to help, you know, municipalities pay off the debt that they have already incurred or that they're on the hook to pay right now, or the contracts that they have for power that they have right now that they can't get out of. How do they help, or how do they propose to help those, you know, us and everybody else that's in the same situation we're in, whatever, you know, magnitude they are? How is there anything in this bill that helps provide for that? I have yet to find that, and I've spent some time digging through it, trying to find something, anything that I could see that would support that, and I don't see it, and I've not heard that yet from any discussion I've seen about this, you know, in the public realm. So that's something that, you know, in my mind, that's the biggest thing, is we don't have an answer for that, and if this goes through the way it is, basically the only option we have is put it on our taxpayers. We can't declare bankruptcy and walk away from the debt that we owe Prairie State. Nobody can at this point without either, you know, state or federal legislation. And I think it would almost have to be federal, because this affects a ton of municipalities and entities outside the state of Illinois. So I think that's one of the big hangups I have on this whole legislation, is that it's not just about who buys electricity in Illinois, you know, where it comes from. So that's something that I hope that, you know, before this gets passed, that we have some clarity to where that money's coming from, other than our ratepayers.
Anyone else? I agree with you, Alan. I think this legislation might be a little premature. I mean, the things that still, it almost sounds like a wish list. And, you know, there's nothing really confirmed that this is going to happen, not the legislation, but the things in the legislation.
Right.
It's a lot of projections. And, you know, we've already dealt with projections in 2007 when we were getting into Prairie State. I don't want to deal with projections again, if we can help it.
Right.
You know, I spoke with Gary earlier today, and, you know, we got into Prairie State, and it was all looked well and good in 2007. You know, all the experts and the high dollar lawyers we talked to, and the experts all said it's moneymaker because the cost of gas was high. And just as we signed a deal and they were building Prairie State, fracking occurred and the price of gas plummeted. Price of electricity plummeted, but we had fixed costs at Prairie State. So that became an issue. But we went into it full bore, no diversification. We've learned our lesson that we need to diversify, and I don't believe it's diversifying just going into these renewables that are, you know, solar and wind. I think that's kind of locked in together, and so we need to diversify more than just the renewables. And so I think there's, and since the federal government is committed to decommissioning the nuclear, coal is still going to have a role in electrical generation. So I'll leave it there for now. Should we ask?
I just have those two other items that council had asked about.
Pardon me?
I just have the two other items that council.
Oh, yeah, please do. Thank you.
These will be much quicker. And really, it's me just wondering if you guys have any follow-up questions. I had sent you a summary of the Nimpa power sales agreement, which talks about the term of the agreement and termination of the agreement. I listed all the items there about you know, Nimpa providing Batavia power, but then also, you know, when the agreement will terminate. So I throw that out there in case anyone has any questions on that. And at the same time, I also provided an update on Nimpa's bonds. This was actually provided by David Niles, who is with Avant Energy, who is our advisors. He provided a summary of our three bond issuances for Nimpa, as well as an explanation as to how the bonds are structured and, right now the balance due and versus the value of Prairie State. He kind of went into it in that explanation. So,
Gary, I think the question often comes up. Can these bonds be refinanced? Can these bonds be securitized? Can you respond to that?
So the 2009 and 2010 bonds were Build America bonds, and those were issued by the government and coming out of the Great Recession. Basically, those are taxable bonds, and obviously as a municipality and as a Nimpa, as a public joint action agency, we would be eligible to get tax-exempt bonds. But back then, the government was trying to incentivize growth and prosperity. So what the government basically said was, we'll issue these taxable bonds, and then on the back end, we'll give you subsidies to offset what essentially would be the taxes. So the 2009, 2010 bonds cannot be refinanced in any way. Those are Build America bonds. They're kind of set aside in their own category, and they are what they are. 2016 bonds, which that's when we refinanced. They were actually originally 2007 bonds. We refinanced them in 2016. Those will be callable again in 2026. So obviously, if interest rate environment in 2026 is favorable, Nimpa can pursue a refinance just like we did in 2016. The term securitization, though, is not something that is applicable to us as a government entity with these bonds. So that term gets tossed out there, and it's essentially a form of refinancing. And as of right now and through 2026, we don't have any option to refinance.
Thank you.
Hey, Gary, one question, if I may. And two, with these no refi bonds in 2009 and 2010, the taxable bonds, we were going to get reimbursed by the federal government, correct? And then they cut that reimbursement, did they not?
They have.
I'm not getting fully reimbursed by that?
Through what they called sequestration. Thank you, I can't say that word. They have reduced that subsidy that I spoke of. So now actually Nimpa is part of a group and a federal lawsuit against the government to say, you guys promised us this, you're not doing that, we demand that you do what you promised us.
Does anybody else have any questions for Gary regarding?
Mike, this is Joe. I do.
Yes, Joe, go ahead, please.
Hi, Gary. I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but from my reading of this, the goal behind Signage is to do our part in helping to reduce carbon emissions so that we can help better control the climate change that's around us. Based on what you've read and some of the numbers that you've presented to us and some of this data, would there be a counter proposal that you would make to some of the requirements that they're putting within this legislation, such as changing some of the targets, whether it's in the amount of the emissions or some of the implementation dates, or would you be a flat out no? Is there any room in here that something can be, if possible, to negotiate? It's tough to negotiate when you're the little guy and you don't have a whole lot of weight in the fight. But is there something that we would be in a position that we would offer as a counter to this so that it helps show that we're all concerned about climate change on a global nature, and we still want to do what we can, but in a time frame that has less of an impact on us?
It's a great question. I thank you. The answer to your question is yes, and I'll kind of summarize my Reader's Digest version of it. Prairie State is a supercritical coal-fired power plant, which makes it unique in the state of Illinois. It's the most, from an efficiency standpoint, it's the most efficient coal plant, and obviously has $1 billion worth of emissions controls when it was constructed. So it's also the cleanest power plant in the state of Illinois on a emissions per megawatt basis. To answer your, I'm going to kind of tackle your question, Alderman, on pieces by pieces. So being a supercritical coal plant, and being one of the cleanest supercritical coal plants, Signage would call for Prairie State and all other fossil fuel plants in the state of Illinois to shut down. That would leave wind, solar, and nuclear. I didn't get a chance. Nuclear was one of the things that you guys asked for, and I just haven't had a chance to get that particular report put together. But there's 6 nuclear plants in the state of Illinois, roughly all in the northern portion of the state. Those plants do not generate enough electricity to power the entire state of Illinois, nor are there enough wires to carry all the necessary electrons to the entire state of Illinois. So reliance on the nuclears for base load power is not realistic from an engineering standpoint. So Southern Illinois needs to rely on something for baseload power, and if our baseload power goes away, basically Southern Illinois is going to be importing power from adjoining states who happen to have coal-fired power plants who are dirtier than ours. So we're really just bringing carbon in over the wires into our state. So to partially answer your question, Alderman, one, I would say we oppose the closure of Prairie State, and as Alderman O'Brien kind of alluded to, I would support an all-of-the-above strategy where we keep a little bit of coal, we keep a little bit of gas, we keep a little bit of nuclear, we keep a little bit of hydro. We have very little hydro in the state of Illinois. We keep wind, we keep solar, and we build a diversified portfolio as opposed to the lesson Batavia learned, and that was tossing all of our eggs into one proverbial basket. So that's one thing. More at a municipal level, I think and I alluded it to her earlier, CEJA would give the Illinois Commerce Commission authority over municipals and co-ops on some key issues. And today, we are not governed by the Illinois Commerce Commission. We are governed by you. You are the board of directors. You are the CEO of the power utility. I cannot tell you, in my time here in Batavia since 2008, it is countless times that ComEd residents who live in the town or live adjacent to the town have called us up because they can't reach ComEd, but they know when they call us up, they're going to get a live person instantly. And it's that level of service that I don't think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of council, but I don't think you want to give up that level of service. And essentially, by having the ICC take over on some critical issues, you're giving up that control to them. And you are, the direct people who are voted to run the utility. So another item that I think we definitely would want to do is oppose anything related to the ICC, and that goes back to that renewable energy I spoke of earlier. And we do support, I think we've all been very clear in our support for the transition to electric vehicles. But I think I went through this with council at last week's meeting, that according to the standards set forth in CEJA, they would require a 30 to 50 amp outlet be provided for every new parking space and a new parking garage. So for the One Washington Place development, we would literally have to build a new substation just to serve that parking garage based on the amount of amperage for 300 spaces. Obviously, that would hamper economic development. So I'm not opposed to electric vehicles. I think they are definitely the wave of the future. I would own one today if the timing had been just a couple of years different. But to require a 30 to 50 amp outlet per space, that's just going to hamper economic development. I don't know if I answered your question. I guess the point is that I think we do support a lot of the things in CEJA. I think we just, several aldermen said it last week. We all agree we have to go from point A to point B. We just don't want to negatively impact and make life much worse for everyone in that transition from A to B. There's got to be a way to go from A to B in a way that doesn't make things worse, or as I said a few minutes ago, doesn't result in a direct 15% plus rate increase to our ratepayers.
Gary?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate more on what pieces, what regulatory decisions would be taken from us and given to the ICC?
One was the renewable energy percentages. There's also reporting requirements, right to self-generate electricity. We're not, that's another one that would be through the ICC. There's several references within the Illinois Power Agency Act where it would grant the ICC authority over municipalities. And again, we are not governed by the Illinois Municipal or Illinois Power Agency Act. That's the IPA is the agency that buys power and capacity for the investor-owned utilities. We're not governed by them. I'm trying to go through and find the other references to ICC. I think those are the big ones.
But, when you look at the ICC is there to regulate the investor-owned utilities because they are for-profit organizations who report to shareholders, and as a corporation, their goal is to maximize shareholder wealth. On the other hand, a municipal utility, again, as Gary said, you are the governing board of that electric municipality, and you answer to the ratepayers. So the ICC, I think, was put in place originally to be the voice for the ratepayers in the situation of investor-owned utilities. And I think that municipal electric utilities are different and should be kept apart from the ICC.
I would agree with that. I would not want to be regulated by the ICC. I mean, as you said, Gary, our electric utility, we've always been very proud of it. The response time is not even hours, as opposed to days. So I think we do very well. We have a redundant system that we've worked hard at, and I wouldn't want that to slip on us with any kind of regulation from the ICC, which would end up costing our utility more money because of their regulations.
Frankly, their reporting requirements, we're required to report to them, well, technically we're not. I actually make a disclosure on the reporting every year that we are not required to submit this report, but they make us submit a report every year on projects, and I basically say to them that we're not required to submit this report, here's my report. Now, I've done that for years, and that it just goes into a filing cabinet down there. They never even respond back, so.
Anybody have any more questions or comments for Gary at this time? Should we ask Bill and Bill to join us now, I guess?
Sure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to activate microphone for Bill Scone and for Bill Kale, who I apologize if that's not how to pronounce your name. But you also have a report that you'd like to show, so I'd like to promote you to panelist so that you're able to screen share.
So they'll put their PowerPoint up on the screen?
Yeah, they should be able to do that. I'm looking for Bill Scone.
Yes, so I'll put the PowerPoint up. However, before we start, I'd like to say that, obviously from our presentation, we disagree with a lot of what Gary just presented. And, the process where Gary has gone through this long list of items, a number of which we disagree with, is really difficult. Can we ask that Gary share his most recent memo with us so we have a list of all of the issues that he's raising? We will address a number of the issues as we go through the discussion, the presentation. So Bill Kale, would you like to start? And I'll share my screen, hopefully, if I can figure out how to do that.
All right, I assume I have audio now?
You do. I'm looking for, okay, I can see where to share screen here.
I can, Bill Scone, would you like me to share my screen of your presentation? You can just tell me when to advance the slide? Or no, you've got
actually,
it.
I think I've got it.
You've got it, okay.
What I want to do here, let's see, slideshow from the beginning. Okay, Bill, can you see that? Can everyone see that?
We can all see it here.
All right.
You can see the presentation.
Looks like we're good to go. We are at a little bit of a disadvantage here is that we prepared our presentation over the last week, and it will not be a direct response to Gary's concerns. And we want to thank him for his due diligence and bringing up all these issues. We all want to have the best for Batavia. We realize we need to respond to climate change, but we don't want to harm people in the process of this. So it is very important we identify all of these issues and see that they are all addressed, and that's what we're intending to do. Our presentation tonight was actually prepared last week with the information we had then. So for some people who are watching, it might seem like a little skewed if we're not responding directly now to what was just said a few moments ago. It's kind of like a bank shot. So we're going to do the best we can with this here. I'll start out saying thank you. I'm Bill Kale. I'm from Geneva, Illinois, with the League of Women Voters of Illinois. And first, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank the mayor and the council for inviting us to be here tonight. The next slide is up for the introductions here. We'll have 4 presenters tonight. Bill Scown, who just heard, also an advocate with the League of Women Voters of Illinois, also of Geneva. We'll have Kevin Bream from RMI. Kevin is the co-op and municipal utility lead for the SHINE initiative of the Rocky Mountain Institute, now called RMI, and the author of the previously distributed RMI report. Carrie Shepard. Carrie is the Montgomery Foundation Environmental Law Fellow at Northwestern's Bloom Legal Clinic. He works at the clinic focusing on areas of environmental advocacy, including climate change, air pollution, energy law, and environmental legislation. And finally, J.C. Kibbe with the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. J.C. analyzes and advocates for policies that advance renewable energy, energy efficiencies, clean transportation, sustainable development, and grid modernization at state public utility commissions and at the state legislature. Next slide. We have a 4-part agenda. CEJA, what's it mean for Illinois, with Bill Scown. After that will be CEJA, what it means for Batavia, from Kevin Bream, and then Batavia, the bonds and the contracts from Carrie's point of view, and finally Prairie State, can we live without it, from J.C. Kibbe. Next slide. This is our concern, is that the coal economy has brought the industrial revolution is now leaving with the arrival of the clean energy revolution. In the last decade, the production has dropped 33%. In the last year, coal used for electricity has dropped 20%. And last year, the use of coal has fallen to its lowest level in a century. Next slide. So what happened to the clean coal? We're at a bit of a disagreement in this, so we'd like to see some of Gary's works too. This would be excellent for everyone to understand this, because as we see it, the extra $1 billion of equipment brought the plant in line with other coal plants. It made it possible to use the otherwise unusable Illinois brown coal. Currently, Prairie State is an enormous source of pollution. It's the top 10 source of industrial pollution in the country. It emits more health-harming sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides than any other plant in the state. It emits twice the pollution of the next largest plant in Illinois. Studies suggest that the amount of pollution the plant emits would be responsible for up to 50 premature deaths a year. The continued operation of this plant is inconsistent with the state, national, and international goals to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Hopefully, having framed the seriousness of today's discussion, I now turn this presentation back over to Bill Scown.
Okay, I'd like to focus just for the next few slides and at a higher level, not on Batavia alone, but on what's in it for Illinois. And the first is carbon-free power by 2030. And support for the communities that have been impacted and will be abandoned by coal-burning power. Ensuring Illinois reaches 100% renewable energy by 2050. Notably, the big change difference here is carbon-free by 2030. Renewable by 2050 means elimination of nuclear as well as coal and gas. Promoting jobs, equity, economic opportunity, especially in communities of color and in the communities that were impacted by this bill. So there is extensive money, over $200 million in the bill to address the people who have lost jobs, in their communities who have lost the tax base. And we feel that, this is a sizable investment in a transition that's fair. And lastly, reducing the equivalent of 1 million gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles from the road. And I'll speak to this in a little more detail later. This is not something that's going to impact Batavia in the same way it impacts the ComEd customers in the state. So, impact on Illinois jobs. In one of the previous memos that Gary published, he made the point that this was going to be a disaster for the Illinois economy. And more jobs were going to be lost than jobs were going to be created. And the bill will actually create, I've got one slide too many here. Maybe I can go back. Let's see. No, that's it. Sorry.
I think you did skip slide 7.
Yeah, you missed 7. There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I can't get back to the slide presentation mode because mine blocked by the Zoom taskbar at the top.
Oh,
So,
Bill, at the bottom, if you go to the right of there's a presentation button down on the bottom as well. My leave button is in the bottom right-hand corner. It's just up and to the left of that. Yeah, you're in the neighborhood if you head right. One more, that one.
there we go. Okay. So new private investment in Illinois, $39 billion. State and local tax revenue increases $6 billion. Average directly workforce investment $1.5 billion. So, and there was concern that, this overstates the positive economic impact. And this is the plus side. Admittedly, as Gary pointed out a week or two ago, there will be jobs lost. However, the point we'd like to make is that it's been shown time and again that fossil fuel employment basically creates more jobs than is lost for the fossil fuel. Clean energy replaces or creates more jobs than the fossil fuel sources that it replaces. And we can see that already where we currently have over 2 million jobs in clean energy and energy efficiency compared to half that many jobs in fossil fuel energy. A lot of these jobs are the same as you have for the fossil fuel business. The installers, service technicians that service clean energy jobs are in many cases very similar to the jobs that service the fossil fuel industry. Economics from a state level view. And we obviously have some differences in opinion as to what's happening, as to what Gary just presented this evening. All of the costs and programs in the SEJA bill do not apply to munis and co-ops. So one of the costs that does apply to munis and co-ops, such as Batavia, are the funding for the community reinvestment program. This is a cost that all customers of fossil fuel generating utilities will pay, ending in 2030. There is the community energy community reinvestment fee, which is basically, as Gary said, a tax on carbon. And this is estimated to be 1/2 cent per kilowatt hour for Prairie State, capped at a maximum of 1 cent per kilowatt. So this plus the coal extraction fee, which is 6% on the extraction value of coal, create a fund of $210 million a year that go to the assistance and support of the impacted communities and the workers. So Batavia will bear these costs during the transition until Prairie State is shut down, and then these costs basically go away. The rest of the costs and the programs on this page basically are not going to apply to Batavia. These are costs that are applicable to the public utilities, ComEd and Ameren in particular. And these programs and these costs basically are not going to be something that munis and co-ops deal with. Gary mentioned that the electric vehicle program in SEJA would create a large problem investment requirement for Batavia. The electric vehicle program only applies to ComEd customers and ComEd territory. It does not apply to other territories and does not apply to Batavia. gas efficiency, energy storage, electric vehicles, the RPS charge, capacity market reform, the costs and savings from these programs really do not accrue to co-ops. Okay, I think we are now up to Kevin Brehm. Kevin, are you there?
Yes. Sorry, I'm here. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for inviting us to speak on this topic. I'm Kevin Brehm. I'm a manager with RMI and lead author of the report that we were discussing. I am, of course, calling from home, where I have a 3-year-old who may be objecting to go to bed, so please excuse any background noise on that front. If you're not familiar with RMI, we're an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit that advances market-based solutions to accelerate the clean energy transition. Along those lines, our work involves a set of consulting, working alongside utilities, as well as a variety of analyses. I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the findings of our analysis, looking at the economics of Prairie State Energy Campus and some of the implications of what that might mean for Batavia ratepayers. So, I think first, just as context for this, I think we all can agree that policy discussions are most productive when they can be based on publicly agreed to facts coming from reliable data sources, so we can at least have a starting point in the fact. So when this report that we published was based upon a set of publicly available sources coming from national labs, coming from markets, coming from EPA, EIA, and a variety of other sources. I'm going to speak to you about a few of the insights from the report. And I think broadly, these address, it concludes that given the trends we are seeing in coal, in the cost of alternatives, clean energy, low carbon sources, we don't believe that 2030 closure of Prairie State would directly increase rates compared to alternatives. Now, before I get into that, I'm going to speak a little bit to what this analysis addresses and what it doesn't address. In Mr. Holmes' remarks, he mentioned a few of the costs associated with implementing CEJA. This kind of looked broadly at closure, so it didn't specifically do any of that analysis looking at some of those specific costs, so I can't speak to those directly. But I can address a couple of the points that he brought up in going through sharing some of the economics and some of our findings. So can you go to the next slide? So again, I think as a starting point for this, it's important to understand what are the economics of this plant. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, there were a lot of promises made about how this Prairie State would perform compared to alternatives when it was first proposed. And then in reality, it hasn't quite met expectations. So I just wanted to share, based upon publicly available data, how is the plant performing? So there's a couple ways to cut that question, and I'm not going to go into all of the detail, but the bars on the orange, I'll start from the left side, break down how much it costs to operate the plant on an ongoing basis. And the bars on the right, starting in this section on the left, tells you how much it would cost to buy the replacements. So Prairie State provides 2 important market services. It provides energy in the moment, and it provides capacity, your ability to ensure that you have power when you really need it. So these bars on the left show how much market energy and capacity has cost over the years studied here. This was 2016 to 2019 in the MISO and PJM markets. So you see, looking at that, just looking at forward-looking costs, that Prairie State has cost more than buying those same things from the market. And basically the implication there is that if you decided to not operate the plant at all from 2016 to 2019 and had bought these services from the market, you would have saved a little bit of money. Now, it's more complicated than that. I'm not arguing that exactly the case, but that's sort of one way to interpret this. Second would be, okay, well, that's the cost of capacity, but what would it cost if you needed to build new capacity? In this instance, it would be a new gas plant, is what this analysis shows. to be able to provide that same capacity service. And if you use that lens, then Prairie State costs less than that market alternative would. But I think a key point here is that if you include the interest and principal associated with the plant, it costs significantly more than buying market services. So the point here is it's roughly break even now. Now the question is, what will those economics look like in the future? How do we expect them to trend in the future? So I think just first of all, while we're on this slide, I wanted to address one point that was brought up previously about the cost to procure market renewables. Now, currently, the cost to build, own, and operate solar, for instance, through a power purchase agreement has been around 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's usually something that you would buy from a third party. So that's the cost to build, own, and operate at the total cost. So that's roughly equivalent to the cost currently to operate Prairie State coal plant. And I just want to sort of contextualize and compare that. That's, again, currently it's slightly more. That cost would be slightly more than the cost to buy those market services, but we see those costs are decreasing over time. The other point I wanted to address was about the claim that you would add $5 per megawatt hour to market those renewables. I'd be interested in hearing from a market source that would confirm that. In my experience, the profit is already baked into that power purchase agreement price that's cited here and on a subsequent slide. And generally, the cost to market those into the market is relatively straightforward and could be primarily automated because from renewables, you just automatically sell the renewables as they're generated. So wanted to address that comment. I'll go to the next slide and sort of speak a little bit.
Before you move on, can I ask you one question before you move on that last slide?
Yeah.
When you show Prairie State with, the principal and interest on there, that doesn't just magically go away in 2030. That would still be there for us, as well as purchasing the renewables and the market power. So how does that then become less cost to us if we're still in that contract and still paying the principal and interest on Prairie State and having to go out to the market for everything else, including that?
That question makes sense. And if you want to jump to the next slide, Bill, maybe I can address that and circle back to this. So I think this is somewhat of an illustrative example of how you might think about those costs and those costs transitioning over time. So again, the comment was brought up at the start about the transition to renewables and the need to procure renewables earlier. That's not accounted for here, so I wanted to recognize that up front. But I do want to sort of narrate this chart from the left to the right as illustrative of what we might see under CEJA. I would caution that the analysis we've completed is primarily looking at the whole plant. So there's certainly opportunity to evaluate specific to Batavia. So looking at this chart on the left, you can sort of see a set of stacks that from 2020 through 2030, Batavia and other PSEC owners would face. On the bottom is plant interest and principal repayment. Then on top of that is fuel operations and maintenance costs. And then on top of that is this coal severance and energy community and reinvestment fee, which would be a fee that would be reintroduced introduced as part of CEJA. So what would happen in 2030? So basically the approach our analysis has taken is come 2030, you would no longer have to pay for fuel operations and maintenance. And instead you could sign an agreement or a power purchase agreement or directly purchase services equivalent to what was previously provided. You would still need to pay for that plant interest and principal repayment. But this gray bar here, this PPA, is the entirety of the cost that you would pay for those new market services or energy. And I think this reflects the fact that wind and solar have gotten to be so much cheaper. So it is an unfortunate situation that you would need to continue, assuming, in this scenario, continue to pay the plant interest and principal repayment. That's a significant cost. That would be the wholesale energy and capacity costs, which is most likely the largest part of your retail electricity prices. But it would be possible to replace that fuel operations and maintenance costs with new energy and capacity sources from clean energy resources.
So can I ask one question regarding that? It looks like the cost of the solar and wind would be the same as our operations and capital additions for Prairie State. Is this after subsidies have ended?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that actually segues up to the previous slide. So do you want to go back to the previous slide?
Thank you.
So the short answer, unfortunately, is we don't know. It's 2030. It's a long time off. What we can do is we can look at the best models out there and the best projections. In this instance, we used a couple sources. We used to look at market costs. We looked at traded market futures. So just like there's futures for commodities, there's some futures for the cost of energy. Another source that we looked at is National Renewable Energy Lab's projections on the cost of wind and solar over time. The third thing we did is we used some of those sources and we did some internal modeling through something called a clean energy portfolio. So I can sort of explain how all those things shake out and what it means and address your question about subsidies. So, I think just to paint, first of all, this chart at the left, and this starts to address your question about subsidies. You can see the cost of a solar power purchase agreement historically and into the future. And this again is the cost to build, own, operate solar. And you can see how that cost has declined dramatically, and it's expected to decline through 2029. You can also see wind PPA, how that's declined and how that's expected to decline in the future. You can also see how those costs have trended downward, and then there's a blip upward. That reflects our modeled decrease in the tax credits. And our assumptions, this was actually modeled before tax credits were extended at the end of the Trump administration. And that extension of the tax credits would actually sort of drive the cost a little bit down. So what you would see and what we've modeled is that for wind, those tax credits would have gone away. For solar, tax credits would remain through 2029 at a 10%, which is lower than they currently exist. So the short answer to your question is there is some small amount of tax credit, but by 2029, most of the tax credits that we currently see have gone away. So I'll pause there. Is there a follow-up question about that?
No, not for me.
Actually, I have a follow-up question. In slide 14, you show that the clean energy cost is basically equal to our current cost right now, but there's no way to power the state or Batavia all on clean energy. It's not sunny or windy all the time. So how are you saying that it's the same price?
Yeah, and we wouldn't argue either that you could power Illinois entirely on wind and solar, particularly wind and solar within Illinois. So we've modeled a couple scenarios here, and maybe this chart on the bottom can help me address that question and address how we can retain reliability with a portfolio of clean energy resources. So if you look at the chart on the bottom, it kind of zooms in on 2029 and looks at Prairie State plus a carbon fee. So this is somewhat of an arbitrary, this is not CEJA, but this is recognizing in part that beyond Illinois, the president has, announced his intent to have a carbon-free U.S. grid by 2035. So the likelihood of having some sort of federal or state legislation that puts a price on carbon, however it does so, is likely to be increasing over time. So that's certainly a scenario I think all utilities are considering right now as they're doing their planning. First, I have market energy and capacity as one of the comparisons to Prairie State Energy Campus and just sort of projecting how that's likely to trend over time. On that point, I just wanted to address Mr. Holmes' comment about if Prairie State were closed down, what the emissions impact would be of buying out-of-state energy. So I just wanted to note that if Batavia were buying energy from the market instead of buying from Prairie State, that would be significantly lower emissions than Prairie State. The only instance in which emissions would increase is if Batavia decided to enter into an agreement with a different coal plant. Based upon your experience, that would seem like a very bad idea. So any market purchases are going to have significantly lower emissions profile than continuing to get energy directly from Prairie State. All right, so then these next two series, wind, this just shows a wind PPA and solar PPA, again, that future scenario. Finally, we have a clean energy portfolio. And this is something that we've modeled that addresses how you could, one scenario where you could provide the full set of services, energy capacity, and making sure you have energy when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So what we've modeled for this clean energy portfolio, and I won't discuss it in too much detail, but we discuss in the report, is a mix of energy efficiency, demand response, battery storage, wind, and solar that would provide the same services that Prairie State currently provides. I think there's two additional points I want to address sort of that have to do with that, and again, address Mr. Holmes' comments earlier. You know, I think first is that the concept of baseload is a concept that we've used for a long time in the utility industry and reflected the way the electric grid used to be operated. Baseload is no longer really reflects the way that load looks, nor the way that generation looks. Their key is you need to match load and you need to match demand and you need to have the right set of technologies to do so. Coal is one technology that kind of does a great job of operating flat out, but we're increasingly seeing that demand goes up and down more than it used to, and having the right set of flexibility is required to match that. Another comment that I just wanted to address about earlier was about Batavia not having the staff to implement energy efficiency and demand response programs. Fortunately, there's an opportunity to procure those services from third parties. And looking across the utility market, we've seen a trend where a lot of utilities, when they request new resources, are putting out what they call all source procurements, where they're not just asking for energy from a natural gas or coal plant per se, but looking for a whole suite of resources and providers that can provide those. This trend is positive. Energy efficiency and demand response leads to economic development in your community, and it puts money directly back in the pockets of consumers. So in your analysis of the plant and alternatives to it, I'd highly encourage you to think about the benefits that come from being able to. So I'm sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think your point is well taken that you need to consider not just the energy from wind and solar, but a set of technologies that can also make sure that you have the energy you need when you need it, or in sort of energy terms, making sure that the capacity is available when it's needed.
So can I just impose upon you one more question? It's,
yeah, of course.
When you said with the clean energy portfolio, you used, storage was one of the components of that. Have we reached storage capacity or the technology for storage for its fullest quality? I mean, isn't it still even in your report, it said that storage wasn't there yet. So we're kind of projecting storage to be there, and they've been working on that for quite some time, and it's not there yet. So is that not kind of projecting?
Well, I think what we're seeing in storage is we're seeing dramatic changes that are already impacting the market now. So I think we're really finally hitting that point where storage is there. And as a result, we're seeing thousands of megawatts of storage go up across the country every year. We're seeing exponential growth in the amount that's going up because when people are in particular building wind and solar plants, it's cost effective. So we do see that cost effective as being reached. And, I think that's driven in part by, the batteries that we have in all of our phones, computers, and increasingly in electric vehicles. So, I would argue that it is there. I would also recognize that there's technical challenges that are trying to be addressed. I think the key is trying to figure out long-term storage and long-duration storage and how to effectively use storage to help cover periods where, for instance, wind isn't blowing and solar isn't shining, if that might occur for days. So when we modeled this, we assumed that costs were going to continue to go down, but we also started as a starting point recognizing the significant cost declines that we've seen over recent years.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. I go to the next slide and probably keep this brief since we spoke to this.
The one beyond this, Kevin?
No, it's this one here, Bill. So, I think just to address kind of one of the takeaways, and this can be a bit of my closing remarks. So part of the reason that we were brought in to do this analysis as an outside party is this is such an incredibly complex coal plant. I think y'all are familiar with this. Prairie State is owned by 9 utilities. They collectively serve 277 rural electric cooperatives and municipal utilities. I'm not aware of any other coal plant with that same level of complex ownership. As you all are aware, those utilities, including yourself, are bound to Prairie State through a set of contracts. One interesting insight that emerged from this and what we've seen elsewhere is oftentimes it's very hard to close down a coal plant even when it ceases to become economic. And we see this in investor-owned utilities. We see this in cooperative utilities, and there's a variety of reasons to do so. When it comes to Prairie State, one of the main challenges would be able to get the consensus from the group to agree to close the plant when you're looking at entities with different interests, different values across different states. In that sense, we believe that legislation that closes Prairie State by 2030 can support a just and smooth transition to affordable clean energy. And as we hope we've demonstrated, do so without forcing Batavia to enter into any more expensive energy, but rather to replace the current energy supply with cleaner, lower cost power.
Kevin, can I just ask why the PPA for clean energy portfolio on this page doesn't start until 2029?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think our analysis did not reflect the full intricacies of CEJA. And as I've heard in this argument, there's going to be some introduction of renewables prior to that. So that's the reason we assumed that the plant would be closed in 2029. So that's the rationale there. I think as Mr. Holm laid out, like when we think about the economics of wind and solar, if you sign a wind and solar PPA at a good price in the right location, even if you're not using energy, that could result in net profit to the utility. It could also result in net loss. So there is some risk to it. But we've seen many corporations that are signing power purchase agreements for that very sense because they sort of see an opportunity to be able to sell for a higher price than they buy it. And we're seeing them throughout MISO, PJM, and across the country. A lot of corporations are entering into these, they're called corporate PPAs or power purchase agreements for that reason.
So this is Bill. The assumption that we made on this model was that we would not be forced, Batavia would not be forced to buy incremental clean energy until Prairie State is closed by the Illinois EPA regulation, which we're estimating is going to be late in the game, probably close to 2030, because basically the older, dirtier coal plants, or EPA, Prairie State is dirty, will likely be closed first before Prairie State. Now, I believe that Kerry will be able to talk to the issue of purchases, requirement for purchases of clean energy before Prairie State is closed in the next presentation. Did that address the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Kerry, are you ready? Shall we go to the next slide?
I am. Thanks, Bill. Was there anything else from Kevin before we wrap up the slide? Okay, here we go. Well, thank you everybody for having us here. My name is Kerry Shepard. I'm a lawyer and I teach and practice environmental and energy law at Northwestern Law School. I want to quickly just thank the council and the mayor for hosting us this evening. We do really appreciate your time in discussing this very important issue for Illinois. So thank you again. I'm going to be speaking just briefly tonight. I know that you've got a lot to talk about and I don't want to take up too much time. But in the previous presentation, Kevin spoke with respect to why we can rationally expect the costs of going forward for Prairie State being labor expenses for things that, are going to continue to exist as the plant is in operation to be roughly equivalent to the cost of, clean energy portfolio that would thus indicate that it's a financially rational decision to transition towards clean energy given Prairie State's economics. As Kevin mentioned, I'm just going to elaborate on a bit. The bonds that Nimpa has issued for the purpose of financing the debt for partial ownership in Prairie State are not a barrier to this vision. And this first bullet point here, payments of the bond debt service will continue regardless of whether the plant is in operation. While that may sound as a negative, it is perfectly rational for businesses and governments on a regular basis to identify that a cost that has been sunk is no longer worth continuing to invest in if there is an alternative that is a better financial deal. And that is what we believe is the case for Prairie State. As a quick note, one of the options for reducing this cost, even though we do not see it as a barrier, is to either refinance or securitize to increase savings. The RMI analysis suggests that Nimpa could save approximately $150 million in a 2030 securitization or refinancing of those bonds. And a quick note on the securitization issue, which was mentioned earlier. Securitization is a financial tool in which the state grants the authority for typically traditional investor-owned utilities to essentially guarantee that in the event of the utility defaulting or ceasing to exist, that charge can still be collected from customers in that jurisdiction. Illinois does not currently have that authority granted to municipal utilities, nor does CEJA include the grant of that authority. However, it is important to consider it as a possibility because if Batavia or other parties were interested in using a tool such as that to reduce costs or to take debt off of your books, that could be something that the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition would be interested in discussing with you. So it's simply raised as a financial possibility, not a promise or an element of CEJA as it's written today. Additionally to that, securitization and refinancing are really just both tools that are designed to get lower interest rates. So if it is the case that refinancing offers a lower interest rate than securitization does, or they're roughly equivalent, really the idea here is simply to allow Batavia and Nimpa to identify and go forward with the best financial deals that are available. And there's a final note here, refinancing the bonds in addition to closing Prairie State really does have the opportunity to open a new chapter in Batavia and Nimpa's choices around clean energy. The agreement that both the Prairie State owners as well as Nimpa has entered into with your members. Our understanding of it is that when this plant ceases to operate, the owners or the members and the owners are welcome to pursue other options. And as Kevin has laid out, we have reason to believe that those other options could be financially beneficial for energy prices. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so that's what this is elaborating on here. So once we get to a point in time in which, PSEC is retired and the bonds are paid off either through refinancing, securitization, or just paying them off under the expected terms for the bonds as they were issued today, that will allow for really a reset button that will, give a lot more flexibility and allow for Batavia to get out from under this unfortunate situation with respect to higher energy prices from this plant. Now, with all this said, the reason that we are here really is to offer our vision on how to improve the financial opportunities, in the energy economy. We think CEJA does a pretty good job of that. But we would certainly welcome proposals on how to further improve this arrangement, and offering affordable energy really is one of the North Stars of CEJA as it's drafted, and certainly of the coalition members that have advanced that legislation. One of the elements that was mentioned, I believe, earlier in today's meeting was this idea that as CEJA is written, there are provisions which would require essentially a renewable portfolio standard for municipal utilities, and those may be in conflict or require double purchasing in some circumstances. where existing arrangements for power for Prairie State would conflict with those. I think that if that's something that Batavia is interested in discussing and wants to see modified in such a way that we are still aggressively pursuing a climate conscious energy future, that we certainly have every intention of making this as affordable of a transition as possible, and we'd certainly welcome that conversation. So I will stop there. As I said, I'm going to keep this brief, but I'm happy to either take questions or simply move on to the next section of this presentation for the next speaker.
I have one question for you. You've got it up on the slide right there, the PPA agreement that says that we have to purchase power from them, and it's for a term. Is there anything that you see as a lawyer in that says that you can walk away from that agreement when the plant gets shut down? Because that was one of the things I was trying to bring up when I asked the last question of how, renewable or any other power source provided to us is a good deal when we still have to pay for what we're not taking.
So before I answer that, I do want to reiterate that while I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney or Batavia's attorney. So this is really commentary on a proposal from the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but I'm certainly happy to discuss the generalities of this here. So, if the state were to require for pollution control purposes that coal power plants cease operation in 2030, there would no longer be power that is being produced from Prairie State. My understanding of the arrangement is that once Prairie State has been retired, the members that were that agreed to cover the costs associated with operation would no longer be required to cover those costs, as they would no longer be ongoing. And I don't know of the specifics regarding what Nimpa and Batavia's arrangement is, but I do believe that Nimpa, as a part owner of Prairie State, would be free to choose power from another source should they. They would have to, and it would, as I think Kevin laid out, provide an opportunity to find a better financial bid.
Okay, thank you.
If I could ask a question of Carrie, you had talked about this part of the CJA maybe eliminating the requirement for municipal utilities to have to purchase power that it does not need because of existing contracts that are in place. But there are some other very onerous financial burdens that are established right up front in the coal severance fee and also in the energy community reinvestment fee. Do you feel that there might be any way to alleviate municipal utilities burdens in those costs?
Well, it's certainly a comment that we can take back to the coalition. I don't have the authority to negotiate or to discuss changes on that front. Really, the point that I was making was that we would welcome your commentary and are happy to continue a conversation on that. I think that one thing I will point out that was not raised in the initial presentation on those fees, but I do think that Bill brought up earlier in his comments, is that there is a 1 cent per kilowatt hour of energy produced cap on the cost of the fee, and that would prevent it from escalating indefinitely beyond that 1 cent per kilowatt hour cap. So in any event, I'm certainly happy to relay that commentary with respect to the costs of those fees, but it's not my role in the coalition to comment on that element of this proposal.
Okay.
This is Bill. I'd like to interject that, our arithmetic looking at those combined fees, the severance fee and the energy community reinvestment program, indicated that the fee effect would be about 1/2 cent per kilowatt hour, or for a typical residential customer, somewhere in the area between $4 and $5 a month. So I believe we have a difference of opinion with Gary over the size of the cost to Batavia customers.
Alan?
Yes, Your Honor, go ahead.
Yeah. This conversation tonight has been highly publicized, and needless to say, there's a lot of people in Batavia have expressed some opinions about it one way or another. And one of the calls I got the other day was from a resident who said that she was wondering, what is the future of solar panel fees? Given that she says she's had the experience where she and her husband have been arguing for the last 3 years about putting solar panels on their roof. And so they brought in a company 3 years ago and got a quote. And now they're, given this conversation that's going on, they decided to invite the company back and talk to them again. And she said that the quote they got this time was, quote unquote, significantly higher than what it was 3 years ago.
Supply and demand.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that regarding the solar costs. You know, I am sorry, I'm not familiar with the reasons those budgets may have been put together by those different companies. But, you know, one of the core pieces of CJ is we're hoping to make solar, including rooftop solar, more affordable. And maybe one of the other speakers can offer more information than I can on that topic.
I've got other members of the city council sitting here shaking their head at my question, so I think it's been asked by others, and you know there seems to be the opinion that solar is not necessarily the cheapest thing that is being it's presented as. That there's a lot of costs that are created in the setup of this, and apparently they've increased significantly over the last few years from what they were originally. So, just for the conversation here, I thought I'd throw that in.
So, Bill, again, you know, I believe the cost of solar equipment has not increased. What is currently the problem is the caps on the allowable solar and credits. So if the problematic PPAs can be renegotiated, and we think they can, that would give Batavia and other munis and utilities the ability to reduce their power purchase commitments and make some room for more behind-the-meter generation, such as rooftop or community solar. So getting some flexibility on your purchases, your long-term contractual purchases, and getting away from your current PPA that requires you to buy more power than you need is part of the solution for solar costs.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps we should transition into the next section here if JC's on the line and available.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Hello, folks. My name is JC Kibbe, as was mentioned, with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm also on the steering committee of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I actually grew up in a municipality with a municipal utility, the Board of Water and Light in Lansing, and have many fond memories of them. So very much appreciate the perspective, the unique challenges, and also the unique opportunities of a municipal utility. And they've done some very exciting things in my hometown that I've been really enjoying watching with the development of solar energy and other things. So I just wanted to share a bit about myself here. Talking about carbon capture, as I know this has been a bit of a hot topic, I suppose, around Prairie State. There's been some discussion that this might be the site of a pilot project by the Department of Energy to that they would potentially subsidize the initial capital costs of installing carbon capture and sequestration, so-called CCS, on one or more of the Prairie State units. I guess a couple things to note about carbon capture and sequestration technology is it sounds quite neat, as though the carbon dioxide emissions all simply go away. This is not the case, even aside from all the other issues that we'll get into in a moment, but even the best CCS systems capture maybe only 70 to 90% of CO2. So we're still talking about significant emissions. But I think even more problematically than that is that carbon capture and sequestration takes a significant amount of energy to operate. And the net effect of this is that it makes the plant less efficient because it requires more energy to produce the energy that it puts out. So this is quite economically challenging, even if someone else is footing the bill for the capital costs. This is also, Mr. Holm alluded earlier to unproven technologies, and carbon capture and sequestration is sort of the poster child for this, particularly on coal plants. There are no operational commercial scale carbon capture and sequestration coal operations in the United States. There was one that was operating briefly, the Petronova plant in Texas, and it closed because it was uneconomical. So I would just say that this, given what we've seen about the low costs of clean energy, given what we've seen, and I'm sure the members of this council have forgotten more than I know about the unfortunate economics of the Prairie State plant, even as it stands today, carbon capture stands to likely make those economics even worse and that efficiency even worse. So I just wanted to speak a bit to that issue, and I think we can move to the next slide.
Can I ask just one quick question?
Certainly.
So with the carbon capture, is there any new technology for that coming down the pike, or is this at its zenith right now?
Well, the technology that I'm aware that's actually in discussion within the DOE pilot, which I believe is sort of the main thing that folks are thinking of when they talk about CCS on the Prairie State facility, is a technology that's already established. So it's possible that, that pilot wouldn't pan out, and that there theoretically might be some future opportunity for CCS on the plant. But I think as coal declines very quickly, the relevance of CCS technology for a coal plant will probably decline. And so I guess to say the proposal on the table today is not using any particularly new technology, and I don't have a crystal ball, but my guess would be that there wouldn't be a proposal along those lines in the future. But again, I don't have a crystal ball.
Can I jump in, Alderman?
Please, Gary.
Petronova, first of all, has shut down, and that's because it was based on a completely different economic model. Petronova was established basically to use CO2 to enhance oil recovery, and when oil prices decreased, they lost their revenue source because the oil prices decreased. And they also did not use the 45Q tax credits, which is a federal program specifically out there to enhance or to promote carbon capture. Again, just a completely different economic structure than what had been considered for Prairie State. There is new technologies that are being considered, and I've said this to a couple of our state legislators. This particular topic isn't an Illinois issue. This particular topic is a worldwide issue. Some of the largest coal generation in the world is in India and in China and in the United States. And to the best of my knowledge, India and China are not actively pursuing carbon capture on their plants. And they're probably not likely to pursue carbon capture on their plants. So if we want to address, one way of addressing the world warming, is to go after those plants in those global locations, but you need the technology to do that. And, America, throughout history, we have a long history of developing technologies and being the leader and then exporting those technologies around the world. And this is an opportunity to do that, where a technology could be developed here and then utilized on plants in India and plants in China, which would then improve the overall global picture. And, are they 100% effective? No. But would they be a lot better than they are today? Yes. So I guess it needs to be viewed as a global perspective and not as an Illinois issue. That's really all I have to say.
Gary, one other question for you then is, isn't Prairie State now in a study for that technology?
Yeah, through the
Department of Energy.
Through the Department of Energy, through the University of Illinois, some big heavy hitters: Mitsubishi Heavy Industry, Kiewit, Sargent and Lundy, those are private people who see the potential marketplace. I mean, again, those are all worldwide corporations who aren't just worried about Illinois. They're worried about, how can I sell this technology to India? Or how can I sell this technology to China, where there's millions and millions of people and lots of power plants? That's their perspective on it.
So, Gary, just a thought, we're not proposing to close Prairie State tomorrow. It looks like 2029, 2030, most likely. And in addition to Prairie State, there are lots of other coal plants where this technology can be tested.
Yeah, if I may, I appreciate those comments, Mr. Holman. Appreciate your interest in the worldwide pathway that we need to hit our livable climate targets, which includes reducing our emissions 50% across the world by 2030. And we at NRDC have done quite a bit of work on that. We have an office in Beijing, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk with you about global pathways for achieving our climate goals. I've made an effort to speak tonight to the particular interests of Batavia and the particular economics of this plant, and have sort of tailored the presentation accordingly. And so I thought that the issue of the reduced efficiency and the increased energy to run the plant might be a relevant one, but I do appreciate your interest in the bigger picture and would actually like to continue that conversation another time.
Very good.
Sounds good. Thank you, JC.
So, but getting back to Batavia, getting back to Illinois, getting back to the Clean Energy Jobs Act and sort of the dollars and cents and today, I wanted to speak a bit to the issue of reliability, because I know that this is, for most people, that is the first thing that the first and perhaps last thing that they care about besides the number on their bill, is that when they flip the light switch, the lights go on. And, a concern that's been raised in the context of this proposed closure of Prairie State has been that it could affect reliability. And so I wanted to address that here, and I don't mean to be flip, but the short answer is that the closure of Prairie State would not have an impact on reliability in Batavia. And the very simple reason for that is that the Prairie State plant is located in the MISO grid, which serves mostly Illinois, south of I-80. Batavia is located in PJM, which already has quite a bit more capacity than it needs. Recall that these grids are operated by grid operators. It's their job to ensure the reliability of the grid. While I appreciate that your utility has many, many responsibilities, the responsibility, of keeping the grid reliable in your cases with PJM. So just to give this a bit of additional context, because often the specter that's raised when we talk about closing fossil fuel plants is Texas. And I'll just speak to that head on. And Texas didn't have any sort of capacity market. And a capacity market is a mechanism by which you have a certain amount of reserve power above what you expect your maximum demand will be. You have something above and beyond that, which you can draw upon in the case of an emergency. Texas didn't have that at all. The main problem in Texas was that their natural gas plants were not operating, and their capacity dropped about 40 to 50% at times. But what you have in the PJM zone, in fact, is an excess of capacity. Overall, in PJM, about twice as much capacity is procured as necessary. The engineers say that about 15% of a reserve margin is necessary. PJM as a whole procures about 29%. Within the ComEd zone specifically, there's actually about a 9 or a 10% excess capacity. But just to say that the Prairie State plant does not sell capacity in the PJM market or meaningfully contribute to reliability in the PJM zone. And even at that, there's a significant amount of excess capacity within the PJM zone. So the closure of this plant would not affect that reliability at the grid level. At the local level, I won't belabor this point other than to refer to Kevin's presentation, where he discussed all source procurement and the opportunity to put together a clean energy portfolio of resources that will do the things that Prairie State currently does, but at lower cost. So I hope that's clarifying on the reliability point, and of course would be happy to field any questions.
JC, I have a question. You talk about the MISO. What types of energy what kind of sources of energy creates their energy? What sources creates their energy? What
types of generators
Yes.
go into PJM and MISO?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned up there wind, solar,
coal.
Sure. So are you thinking of across the entire MISO region?
Yeah.
So MISO is actually a fairly wind-heavy region, and there's a lot of different ways that you can cut this, and I'll get into in a moment. I don't mean to say that it's all wind. But I was looking at the energy generation mix earlier today, and I think it was in the 30% of wind. There is a fair amount of coal in MISO. Admittedly, there's some gas. There's less nuclear in MISO than there is in PJM. And admittedly, we think that the existing decline of coal generation within MISO is going to need generation to replace it. And outside of Prairie State, all of the coal in the MISO zone in Illinois is already set to retire. The entire Vistra fleet is already set to retire, regardless of what the Clean Energy Jobs Act does. That's just by market forces. But one way or another, we're going to have to figure out how to replace that lost generation in MISO. We think, and many others think, that the most economical way to do that is going to be primarily with a mix of renewable energy and batteries. In the PJM zone, there is some coal. It's a smaller slice of the portfolio by quite a bit than it is in MISO. The PJM zone in Illinois, I believe, has the largest penetration of nuclear energy in the country. It's about 56%. The remainder is a combination of coal, gas, and wind. So we think that when we look at the reliability margins that we're currently seeing in PJM, we think that we're going to be able to maintain those pretty effectively, even with the closure of the PJM coal plants. And then when you layer on top of that the additional renewable energy build that we're seeing, we think that the PJM zone where you are is going to continue to be in good shape.
Okay, so it sounds like even though we may be closing the plants and the fossil fuels here in Illinois, our energy is still going to come from those sources. Just looking at the mixes, because I brought up the fuel mixes for each of those companies, and PJM, their top three is gas, coal, and nuclear for their items that you referenced. And then also for MISO, their top one was coal.
Right. That's correct. And those mixes are changing very fast. And I guess I'd make one point about PJM, which is that PJM is a large grid that stretches from here all the way to the Atlantic Ocean and includes several states, including Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and others. And so the mix can vary quite a bit between zones within PJM. So when I talk about a 56% nuclear power mix, I'm referring specifically to the ComEd zone of PJM. In other areas of PJM, Ohio in particular, there's a much higher penetration of gas, for instance. So when we talk about the resources in the PJM zone, it can vary quite a bit from state to state. So if Ohio were to take all of its gas offline, for instance, or all of its coal, it might be in a different place in terms of reliability as opposed to the Illinois ComEd PJM zone, which is very heavily nuclear power and so is less reliant on the coal units.
So I guess the next question to that, JC, would be if they're decommissioning the nuclear plants and we're going to do away with coal by 2030 and nuclear plants are gone, is all we'll have is going to be gas, solar, and wind?
No gas.
Well, we're not proposing decommissioning the nuclear plants.
I know you're not, but I think the federal government is, correct?
No, well, by 2030, after 2030, those plants are going to be at end of life. So somewhere between 2030 and 2050, those plants are shutting down.
So I think that was Mr. Holm, is referring to is a process at the the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, wherein plants have to renew their licenses periodically. In the past, those licenses have often not been extended beyond 60 years. As far as I know, none of us have a crystal ball to know whether they plan to renew those plants on the next license renewal or not. But I guess that none of us know either way what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to decide years from now on those license renewals, nor what Exelon, the owner of those plants, is going to do in terms of submitting for the license renewals. But there's nothing set in stone right now that says that those reactors are going to go offline. And it's also true that by 2050, it's hard to foresee the changes in technology that we may have by then, and for instance, battery technology, renewable energy technology, et cetera. So it's just difficult to speculate as far out as 2050.
So CEJA, though, is speculating, because CEJA says 100% renewable by 2050. And under the definitions within the law, renewable energy does not include nuclears. Nuclears are zero emission facilities. They're a separate definition. So under CEJA, there would be no zero emission facilities by 2050. It would be 100% renewable.
So it's a fair point, Mr. Holm. A couple points there. One is that about 1 in 4 U.S. states has 100% zero carbon goal by 2050 or sooner already. So this is certainly far from unprecedented. The other thing that I would mention there is that technically what Illinois is required under CEJA to do by 2050 is to procure renewable energy credits equal to the total amount of energy that is used in the state. So in theory, it could do that, and if it remained a net exporter, CEJA is ambivalent as to whether those plants continue to operate or not. Nor does the state, as far as we know, have the authority to shut down those plants. That's the purview of the federal government. What the state does have the authority to do through its power under the Clean Air Act is to close point source pollution emitters, which fossil fuel plants, of course, are. And so that's the authority that we're exercising under CEJA. But the nuclear plants are simply out of our reach at the state level, is our understanding.
Okay, thank you, JC.
It might be helpful too if I could just speak to a couple of other issues that were raised earlier. It's not my intention to litigate the best way forward here, but maybe just so we can agree on the same set of facts for clarity. And then I, of course, welcome thoughts about that. But on the issue of CEJA's electric vehicle provisions, just to be clear, CEJA would not require the installation of electric vehicle chargers in all new buildings. It would allow municipalities, if they wish, to adopt a stretch building code. And a stretch building code is something that's already been adapted by a national building code organization that does include some installation of electric vehicle chargers, although certainly not for every slot in the building. But that would be your choice as a municipality, whether you wanted to adopt that stretch code or not. On the issue of ICC regulation, I would just say we truly did try to take pains to avoid subjecting municipal utilities to a lot of ICC regulations, because we did understand that this was an area of tension for you all. Mr. Holm referenced earlier that the planning reports under CEJA do have to be submitted to the ICC. That's true. Hopefully that wouldn't need to be any more than an email over to their office, but really the intent was to address a concern that we heard from many folks who participate in our coalition who live in Batavia and other municipal utility territories, which is to have an open and public process where you can discuss the energy future of the municipal utility in a public way and in a way where there's room for input. So that's really our intention there. The ICC, just to be clear, wouldn't have any authority to veto or take any action on that plan. It simply asks that you share a copy of it with them. And if even that is too burdensome, I would be happy to talk about it. But the intent is to create a forum for discussion, not to create any new hooks for the ICC. Just hope that's helpful, and I thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Shall we go on to the summary here?
Please.
Here we go. So JC, would you like to do this?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Happy to do that. I guess just quickly to summarize everything here. As Bill mentioned, Prairie State is an enormous source of carbon dioxide. I've heard many folks tonight express concern about the existential threat of climate change, what that means for us and our children. And this plant is one of the worst offenders, not only in Illinois, but in the United States. The pollutants that it emits kill 49 Illinoisans each year, according to the Clean Air Task Force. So when we talk about costs, I just hope that we'll consider the cost to our climate and to our lives that go alongside the numbers in the ledger here. CEJA would retire Prairie State by 2030, and we believe this will offer a way to get out from under what has been, as you know, a very burdensome financial contract and allow you to explore options to purchase cheaper clean energy. Reiterated in bullet point 3 here, as Carrie discussed, the bonds and the power purchase agreement, we believe are not a barrier, that there are refinancing options and cleaner energy purchase options that would be available at the point when that plant was decommissioned, and in the bonds case, even sooner. I addressed the reliability issue and how that's managed at the grid level by PJM, and that there's already an excess of capacity. And any climate regulation, as economists on both sides of the aisle have supported for a long time, placing a fee on pollution, whether that happens at the state level or at the federal level, any action that's taken on that will result in Prairie State being more expensive, and is yet another reason we believe to find alternatives that are both cheaper and cleaner. So once again, we thank you for your time.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments to make from the council?
Mike, this is Joe. I've got a bunch of questions.
Yeah, Joe, please.
First off, thank you for coming in. I, for one, really appreciate the information you've put forth to us. As you went along, I took some notes, so I think I've got some of them mostly in order. I'd like to start with Mr. Kell. One of your slides, you said that in 2020 there was a big drop in the use of coal for energy production, and I think you were using that to demonstrate how the reliance on coal is going away. But I wonder if there's some other things that may have happened in 2020 that caused the use of coal to go down. I'm in manufacturing, and I know most of our facilities were closed most of the year, as were most of our customers. And when you're molding rubber and you're running hydraulic presses and you're heating your platens, we use a lot of electricity. We didn't use a lot of electricity in 2020. So I'm wondering if using that data point is fair in your data.
I think you addressed that to me, but I did not present that particular slide.
I thought that was on one of your first slides where you talked about the use of coals. Back to slide 2 or 3. So maybe it was Mr. Scone.
Yeah, that was the.
Well, I'm not sure who presented it. What I think the point is that we know there have been a lot of coal plant closures over the last year. And it's not just that demand for power in total has been down. It may have been, but we know that the coal share of the market has gone down, and lots of coal plants have closed.
But I think what I'm looking for, is it because of the change in the fuel, or is it because of change in the demand for electricity total in 2020?
I think it's slide 4 that Alderman Knopp is referring to.
Thank you, Laura.
Councilman, perhaps I could respond to that briefly, because I think your point about 2020 being a bit of an outlier is well taken. I think that isn't necessary. You know, there were a lot of strange things that were happening that year. I guess I would just say that 2020, and I have longer term data on this that I'd be happy to share with you offline. That 2020 is really just the latest for the past decade, coal power has been dropping. From where we stood in 2010, coal power in Illinois we're using less than a third of what we were at that time. So we could say, even if it rebounded a bit from where it was last year, we'd still be talking about more than a 50% drop in less than 10 years. And since 2009, of the 23 coal plants in Illinois, 12 have closed. Of the 11 remaining, 6, I believe, have announced their retirement. So I think that there's fair points to be made about whether 2020 is entirely an indicative year, but the larger trend is down, as both of a share and a total generation amount of coal.
You're muted, Joe.
I don't know how I did that, but thank you. I appreciate that. That makes sense.
Hey, Joe, you're muted again.
I'm going to try this again. My hands aren't touching anything. Thank you. I appreciate that. Before it mutes on me again, slide 8, there was some information shared about the amount of private investments that need to come into the state in order to support renewable energy. Are those investors locked in and on board and ready to start spending money? You know, the concern there would be they have an opportunity to back out if they wanted to for whatever reason, and there'd still be a need for private investment. Is that considered? Is there any risk associated with the potential for them pulling out?
So this is Bill. Let me try to speak to that. So that is not a reflection of firm commitments for investment at this point. That's a economic estimate, an economic study done that predicts the amount of investment and the amount of new job and tax creation that will happen as a result of the Siege bill passage.
Okay. Along the lines of jobs that are created for clean energy, I remember back in the 70s, there were a lot of jobs created for cable installers. But once all that cable got installed, those jobs all went away. Do you see the same kind of effect happening with clean energy jobs here? There's going to be a short-term boom for employment in that arena that has a sudden and continued drop-off?
So, I don't know, perhaps someone else has more insight into this than I do, but my belief is that these clean energy jobs, you know, be it wind or solar or storage and maintaining the grid to connect all this stuff, is just as labor intensive, and I believe more labor intensive than our current fossil fuel generation.
Bill, perhaps I could just briefly add to that, Councilman. One, we're going to be needing to expand clean energy at a rate that we are now, and perhaps even faster for at least the next 30 years and perhaps more. And that's just on the clean energy generation side. We haven't yet even talked about or tapped into what's going to need to happen on the transportation electrification side. Certainly the manufacture of electric vehicles will be an ongoing industry, as well as the improvement and maintenance of the electric grid. But I would add that the largest source of jobs that help improve climate and clean energy in Illinois are in the energy efficiency sector. Before the pandemic, we don't have new statistics yet. There were 90,000 of these energy efficiency jobs in Illinois, and much of that is ongoing. of retrofitting housing stock and of building new energy efficient buildings. So wind turbine technician and solar panel installer are the #1 and #2 fastest growing jobs in the country. And from what we see on the future of clean energy, if we are smart about developing our clean energy economy here in Illinois, will last at the very least for decades to come. And we think, no one looks down their nose at construction jobs, building a pipeline or a building or a highway. And so we would hope that, decades of future job growth would at least be pretty promising.
Okay. And, I was thinking about it more along the lines of providing energy to the municipality rather than the jobs that are created for those other things. Like you mentioned, the company I'm in, we've been working on the electrification of vehicles for a number of years, and we're looking at it now on construction and ag equipment, where things you wouldn't think about, we're getting there. And when you supply to somebody who makes a lot of internal combustion engines, and you see those engines going away, you've got to do something quick. So we've jumped over to electrification, full support. So thank you. I wanted to make sure I understood where the jobs were, and it wasn't just in energy production and providing electrons in the lines. I think that's important. You talked a little bit about battery storage, and we talked a little bit about the technology involved. And I'm wondering, when we talk about the global environment and acting local and thinking global, we're getting rid of coal and what coal does here, and the mining of coal and the burning of coal. But when you start to make batteries, you have to go mine other components, other ores like lithium and cobalt. Are we shifting the pollution sources from local offshore and let somebody else worry about the mess that they're about to get when we do that?
Counselor, this is Kerry Shepard. I can speak to that question for a moment. Really quickly, with respect to the last issue you raised regarding jobs and opportunities in the clean energy economy, I'm not sure if you have access to the chat feature, but I attached a link to a website called Clean Jobs Midwest, which does an annual reporting of what the outlook is for the clean energy sector in states around the Midwest, including Illinois, which should offer you some good information regarding where people are employed and what that growth has looked like in the last few years. With respect to the mining requirements for production for things like batteries, I think that is largely going to be a question of international trade. I'm not sure that the state of Illinois' choice around renewable energy is going to be the most important function in figuring out where that mining is done and what the effects of that are. But as an environmental matter, I think that most people are of the mind that the risk posed by climate change and the health impacts that are caused by air pollution from the electric and transportation sectors really dwarf most other concerns around environmental impacts. And certainly it's important to mitigate and be conscious of where we source our materials from. But I think that the most urgent and serious health impact is reducing air pollution as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. And I'll check that link. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Shepard, my last question was for you. Would asking the Illinois legislature to include provisions for securitizing bonds be in the best interest of the Batavia ratepayers?
It's a great question. One of the things that I spoke to earlier was kind of what the underlying purpose for granting securitization is. And I think that the general idea is you want a system set up that allows municipal utilities to access low-cost capital. Bonding is one opportunity. Securitization of that debt could be another option. I think, we're not obviously talking about refinancing today, but just to use today as an example, interest rates are historically low, and the benefit to securitization is going to be minimized in comparison to other loans and bonds that the market can provide because rates are so low. But if that is something that Batavia is interested in, I think that my recommendation would be take a look at the finer details and speak to people who are more familiar with what Batavia's debt is specifically, and think through whether or not that's an avenue the city is interested in going in. It is certainly one tool that's been used successfully around the country to access low-cost capital, but it's not the only one available. So I don't want to give an up or down recommendation for that. I will just simply say that if that is an appealing opportunity, and if you think that it's worth looking into farther ways to reduce the interest that is being paid, I certainly do think that a lot of finance experts around the country have said that there's merit to using that to reduce costs for things like old debt on energy projects. So sorry for the roundabout response there. I just want to let you know that the data on that matters a lot, but it certainly could be a viable way to go.
But didn't you indicate that right now that option's not available to us because there's no provision in Illinois law that permits that?
That's correct. Yeah. So it is certainly something that would need to be passed as an Illinois state statute to grant municipal utilities that authority. So an energy bill this session could be one way to do that, but there's also no reason that it couldn't be done in future years as well, especially if you have the support for that. So anyway, I'm really not trying to say don't do it. I'm just saying that it's a good opportunity, but I don't want to give an up or down yes or no response to that without taking a close look, or more accurately, without the city taking a close look at exactly what they want to accomplish and what the terms of that would be, because it can be a great way to get low cost capital, but it's not the only option that's available.
But we've got a bill coming before us that's generating in the genesis of all of these conversations that we're having. And one of the potential tools we don't have access to could easily be added to Signage that says, oh, by the way, if you want to use this tool and you think this tool is useful to you, here it is. Mm-hmm. Rather than going and getting a follow-up piece of legislation some other time, maybe, to me, it would make sense that some of these things that are already affecting municipalities and co-ops, here's something that helps mitigate some of those effects included in this bill.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be happy to relay that request. Perhaps I misunderstood your question versus guidance on that front, but that makes sense to me, and I'll certainly relay that to the coalition.
It started out as a question about guidance, and then it kind of expanded a little bit. So,
all right, sounds good to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your time. I appreciate your input, and thanks for helping.
No, thank you. We really do appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else?
I have one more question. Well, we're talking about the legislators and getting, through this and getting Signage, enacted into a law. How much time has been spent by, your groups and the legislators talking about this that has been focused on what happens to municipalities and entities outside the state of Illinois that will be affected by this Illinois law? I don't know who wants to take that. It's just kind of a general question about, how this affects more than just residents of the state of Illinois, because this power that's produced from Prairie State, which would effectively be shut down by this, affects a lot of other states.
This is Bill. Let me start with a couple of points. The first point is the Illinois EPA has the authority to close the plant, regardless of the fact that there are customers of the plant outside of the state. I think that's been pretty well established, and Carrie could speak to that at more length, I believe. The other point is that just as Batavia stands to benefit, and Geneva and Rochelle and others, we believe that the customers, the co-owners outside the state of Illinois also stand to benefit from similar, contracts for expensive power, and in some cases, perhaps power they don't need, like Batavia's.
I think what Bill said is right. I'll just add that the analysis that Kevin from RMI shared earlier was done with a focus on Illinois specifically, But our understanding is that the general themes around the economic opportunity that this could offer would be applicable to part owners of Prairie State outside of Illinois as well. So the analysis was not tailored for them, but our understanding is that the findings would probably be fairly similar for other communities.
Okay, thank you. Again, thanks to everybody that presented tonight. Very informative and, good for us to know that before we go in to talk to our legislators and representatives as we move forward with this, hanging out there.
I'd also like to thank the members of the Batavia Environmental Commission, many of whom joined us for this discussion tonight.
So Laura, do we have anyone, does anybody else on the council have anything else to add or say? Questions to ask? Then Laura, do we have anybody looking to ask questions?
There are no members of the audience with their hand up. I just ask if there is anybody who wanted to speak, if they would.
Okay, Gary, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think before we wrap up, though, tonight we should talk about next steps for you guys. But
Right, we'll probably talk after the coalition leaves us. I just want to say thank you for calling in tonight and for your insights. As Alan said, it was very informative. I do have just a couple of questions, if I may, and then we'll let you guys go. It looks like in the state of Illinois, they're still going to look to build more wind units and solar units because they don't have enough now to pick up the rest of the energy demands. Where would they put them? Land they're going to require a large amount of property to build on. Where would that property come from? Have you been having any discussions with the farmers? And then have you taken into account all of the infrastructure that will be required to tie it all together, all the wires and the poles that are going to go on private property? Has that been all taken into account yet, or is that just something we'll deal with in the future? Anybody?
This is Kerry here. So I know that a number of studies have been conducted on this, and I'm not sure if anybody actually in the meeting today was a part of those. So I'll try to summarize within the knowledge that I have. With respect to the land generally and the impact on agriculture, one of the great benefits of wind in particular, but solar as well, is wind energy actually offers an excellent economic subsidy for farmers in that it's a reliable income that they can expect year after year, especially during a time when fluctuating crop prices as well as changing weather patterns has made things quite difficult for farmers economically in recent years. So that is definitely a benefit that I think is going to attach to a lot of rural communities from legislation like this. With respect to the overall analysis of just the feasibility and making sure the infrastructure can be created, that analysis has been done. But as I said, that's not my area of expertise, but other members of the coalition have worked on that and have come to the conclusion this is a viable proposal. So I apologize for not being able to offer more detail. I just wanted to address your question as directly as possible.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for calling in to the coalition.
Before we close, may I suggest that, there appeared to be some points of difference about the facts of the situation, both, how the bill would affect Batavia and costs associated. If the council and the staff are interested, we certainly would be willing to meet and see if we could resolve those questions and come to a common understanding of what the facts are. So I'd just like to make that offer.
Well, I appreciate that, and we're going to have a discussion following this tonight, and we'll probably have a second discussion, and we can get back to you on that. If
Thank
that's
you.
okay. We have all your information, so we can reach out to you.
Mike?
Yes, Marty, go ahead.
Yeah, I would ask that they stay just in case, because we don't know what we're actually going to be deciding to send a letter in support or send a letter in opposition. I don't know what the wishes of the council would be, but if it would be any type of kind of formal letter of position, that any of the information that we include, we at least have some information from them if there's, as was stated by Bill, some alternative viewpoints.
You know what, I don't know if I'd agree with that, Marty. I would say I'd let these gentlemen take off and we can have a private discussion among, I mean, it'll be open there for everyone if they wish to stay on, but I think we should have our discussion and we can get back to them and decide how we want to get back to them and come to a consensus ourselves. So we just come as one unit. That's how I would see it. So again, I would say, gentlemen, thank you for your time and effort. We'll get back to you. It is a Tuesday night. You'd like to probably get back to your families. It's been very informative. We have a lot to discuss, a lot to wrap our heads around. I really felt it enlightening, and so I do appreciate all your efforts. Thank you. And one other thing, I do applaud, just so we're clear on this, I applaud your efforts and your enthusiasm regarding the environment. I think, speaking for all the council, we all feel the same way. We match your enthusiasm. We just wish years ago that we were able to diversify when we purchased Prairie State. We didn't put all our eggs in one basket. But that being the case, here we are now today. But, the environment is very important. Sustainable building design and clean energy is important to all of us here in Batavia. And, we have children and grandchildren. And so it's about the future of the earth. And it's just one small step in a municipality, and it grows into larger steps as it goes to state, federal, world. So we'll definitely take a serious look at it, and we, again, appreciate all your efforts. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all. Have a nice evening.
So one of the things that Gary had done in preparation for the last meeting was to provide some CJA talking points. I would ask, would it be appropriate following having this discussion and then also the comment that was made last session, that it's important for our legislators to understand what are the impacts to the city of Batavia if this legislation is passed, and also offer any guidance while they're considering passage of the legislation for changes that we might suggest that would lessen those impacts, because as I think it was Alderman McFadden put it, we have to deal with the possibility that this legislation may well pass.
Right.
Yeah, some form of this is gonna pass. I just don't see how it doesn't. And the reality is this is also going to be federally mandated, I think, pretty shortly. So this is something that we have to deal with. And I think, at least from the state level, I think we have a better chance of being heard if, we form whatever things we want to, drive home hard that we need help with. That are parts of this bill that could be really detrimental to us. And if there's opportunities for benefits with the sequestration side, if that's something that they can, write in now, it's a lot easier to get in now when it's in a big giant bill than it is when, this is the only thing we need. We asked that from the legislature about our situation earlier, and it was one thing later on, and we really didn't have a chance to get anything done for us. So I think that this is important that we go in ahead of this bill's passage rather than trying to come in behind and say, wow, you guys passed this and this is going to hurt us now, so we need help with this. I think you're right. I think we have to have a real simplified, here's what we, see as problems, the ICC oversight, the lack of sequestration for us if it becomes a financial, promise for us or something better than just a simple refinance. And really, I think overall, what kind of help is going to be there, when and if, or I should say just when Prairie State shuts down, that, what are we going to be stuck with? What kind of help can the state provide? And what are they going to be willing to say yes to before we say we're, 100% behind this? Because, I'm behind the idea of it. I think there's a lot of things in it that don't help us.
Right.
And those are the things that we have to make sure we present a united front and we really, really push those things before this bill gets any further.
Right. And there may be two pieces of the communication as well. A piece of communication that we utilize when we're talking with our state and federal legislators, and then also a message to provide to our residents so that they realize that what the impacts of this legislation will be if passed as well. And that may look a little bit different and go into more general terms about the background of what CEJA is.
And the one thing I'll say that sticks out in my mind, because I was here through the whole Prairie State ordeal, is the statement that was said, well, at some point you'll be able to sell it back into the market and make money on it.
Right.
I don't even want to hear that. That's not, we should never be concerned with, we think we're going to take whatever we buy and sell it back into the market and make anything off it. The only thing we want to do is be able to provide good service to our customers at a reasonable cost.
Exactly. With
and
exceptional
be responsible
service.
stewards of the environment by providing power that's not damaging the environment.
Right.
Those
May I
are
interject?
Please.
Go ahead, Nick.
The one thing that I don't want to, the path I don't want to go down is an argument between us and them over where the price is going to go and where the break even is. I mean, their mantra over this will pay off or it'll be cheaper in the long run are words that mean nothing to me. Right. What means something to me is eliminating our risk. We know, at least, in our investment now, we have a little risk in that the price, of ownership could shift, but we know what we're buying, what the cost is. We know the bond price. We have some fixed prices going forward. The scary thing for me is that this provides more risk instead of less risk. We don't know, they're throwing numbers at us like, hey, and it's kind of what I imagine happened 11 years ago. They can get us excited about, hey, this could actually be better off for you. It could be cheaper without definitive pricing or answers. And if they can, I think everybody on this council would support this legislation, knowing the benefits for the ecology, if we knew that it wasn't going to cost our residents any more money. They say it's not gonna, but if we can get proof, if they're that strong minded that it won't cost anymore, then maybe there's somebody out there, the state or private investment, that would take our fixed cost and apply it and take the risk to future potential costs. And then we know where we're going in the future, where we kind of are now. So that's my thoughts going in here. I just don't want to get into an argument over, like, at the end, they closed it with, we want to bring, it's our facts against your facts. Well, obviously, if there's two different facts, they both can't be facts. So I don't want to get into that argument. I want to just secure our future with and if it, obviously we all want to benefit the future of the ecology, but we got to know where our future lies and not take on more risk.
Yeah, the graphs that were shown with the costs over time look strikingly familiar to what we were shown with the projections for Prairie State by, experts in the field that had been doing it for 20 years, and these are their projections, and they ran this scenario and that scenario, and here's the high and the low, and where it's going to be in the middle, that's where we think you're going to be. All of that was shown to us.
I'll just say the words, the crossover point.
Yeah.
Those were people showing us graphs that wanted to sell us something and wanted to make money off of that sell. They're showing us graphs based on, hey, carbon in the atmosphere stays up there for 300 plus years. So if we could stop burning every fossil fuel today, we would see continued warming for the next couple hundred years. We might be past the tipping point where we cannot afford to adapt or mitigate to all the changes and all the flooding and all of the famines and all of the impacts that climate change is going to bring. That's real risk. I guess it's funny. I don't understand where the doubt of, I agree. There's two sets of facts presented to us and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but if some graphs are trying to sell us something and something else, another graph, like what are they trying to sell us? Like what's in it for them to lie to us?
Well, there
I'm not saying they're lying. My point is, I need definitive. We would have 100% consensus on this council with everything you say. We all are backers of the goal of CEJA. I would sign up tomorrow, but I don't know what this means to us. We have differing opinions. I want definitive facts that we can come to terms on. And maybe if we can eliminate the risk and somebody else takes the risk because they know that we'll make out in the long run, or we won't. They can take the risk. That's futures right there. That's what I'm saying. I think we're all on the same page. We want this, but it's hard to say, yeah, let's do it without knowing what the actual cost is going to end up.
Marty, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo with what Abby was saying, because I heard points from them tonight that were not economic, that were based in human lives and the cost for that. And that was the ask that I heard from them to weigh as a part of. I guess the reason why I had asked for them to stay is for this discussion to kind of what Joe had reached out and said, here are some of the things that are not in the legislation that could be added. And being as one of them is on the steering committee, I thought that would be a good idea for them to kind of bring back as some takeaways. So I would like us to see if there are items that we would like added. Those are the things that we should be discussing, not whether or not we take positions on the actual legislation. And, because I know it's been said about a united front. Well, my united front is not to support, to oppose the legislation. My united front would be to support this legislation.
Thank you.
And that's where I would stand on it.
Go ahead, Gary.
So again, I think some of the references tonight to different sets of numbers or two different sets of facts. There's a reason why I spent the first 10 minutes going very laboriously through reading the black and white text of the legislation. The text is what the text is of the legislation. The text of the legislation doesn't equate to $210 million. The text of the legislation equates to $400 million. It's right there on page 157, if I recall off the top of my head. It is what it is. And so I've tried as best I can to break it down for city council. And I even went to the page by page, line by line analysis. And if you have questions on a fact, go to that line by line analysis, and I've got them all by heading, and look it up. Page 313, lines 16 through 20, restricts the IPA procurement. Anyways, example by example, you can look it up right in the legislation. The things that I've been talking about. There's no created facts from myself. It's all in black and white, straight out of CEJA. straight out of the document.
So I think, just for clarity's sake for everyone, we are all on board, as Nick was saying. We would support this for the environment, for clean energy, if it wasn't going to hurt our ratepayers. I think what we heard tonight was there's just a lot of projections and questions Joe was asking. I thought Joe asked some excellent questions. There was just a lot of projections even on the answers to Joe, and they said, well, we don't have that data. There was nothing, these guys are supporting it for all good reasons, but there's a lot of projections how Batavia is going to react or how Batavia is going to take this Seidra passing. I mean, it could be devastating to us.
So
Go ahead,
I just
Gary.
jump right back in. One last thing. Straight out of Seidra, straight out of the black and white, the Energy Community Reinvestment Fee and the Coal Severance Fee from the years 2022 to 2029, 8 years, that's $35 to $40 million right there. That's black and white.
Yeah.
That is a cost to the ratepayers. And that then has to be overcome by the future benefits. So you got to save $40 million in renewables, or else you're going to be money behind.
And that takes a long time. When they're looking at the cost of energy today and the cost of renewables later being almost parallel in cost, that takes a long time to get that back. When you go out and buy solar panels for your house today, in a place where you can get money back, you get your 10, 12 grand back, whatever or used to be able to get it as a rebate on your taxes or from the federal
And I guess I
government.
hope there's no debate over that particular point, because those fees are right here in the legislation.
Yeah.
I mean, they are what they are.
And and we're not picking fights with them. I agree with Nick. We don't want to argue with them. It's just, these are the facts, and they didn't truly address the facts because their real concern is to get Seidra passed for the environment, as we would all want to protect the environment here in Batavia. But we can't do it at the expense of I would say at the expense of our city, not just the ratepayers, because if it doubles what we have to pay, the residents who could still afford it, as much as they would ill afford, want to do it, but businesses in the industrial park would leave our city. We can't, I mean,
We talked a lot in the last few
Yes.
years, and especially when COVID hit and so many people struggled to meet their basic expenses.
So we can't do
If going to
that.
lay a 15% increase on the cost of their utilities, that needs to be considered. We should also consider how it might impact things in our industrial park.
Right. And even if that's the tenure of, okay, this is when this is enacted and this is when the plant closes, so that's when we pay the additional money. If that's 8 or 10 years, that's enough to drive a lot of business away from here.
Absolutely.
And it's also going to make anybody that wants to go out and finish any of the infill areas with housing, why would they want to do that here? I mean, that's the fear that I have.
Right.
And you know, I really feel like from the majority of everybody I've heard talk about this in our council, we want to see something progress to that point. But there are things that are in this bill, and when, you know, you look at the numbers, and I asked before we started the meeting tonight, where's the help for us in this? I mean, it's like we're just left out there. Anybody that happens to be part of a non-IMEA unit gets hurt by Prairie State closing. There's just no other way to see that.
But none so much more
Right.
than Batavia.
Right. We are in a particular position as
Uniquely bad
that's where we are. And, you know, I feel like, especially with the legislators, we need to go in and say, okay, we understand what you're trying to do. We understand these. Here's the points we have. These are the things that we need help with, or these are the things we'd like to see you add to it. And how can we get there? You know, how do we get there? What makes those things change, or how do we understand why there isn't that help for us as a municipal-owned electric utility? You know, and
Ellen, this is just to jump in. I agree with you right there. How do we get there? I mean, that's the point I was trying to get across. I wasn't anti this. I'm actually pro the legislation. It's just hard to move forward when we don't have definitive facts or there's conflicting facts. We need to, I mean, this was a great first step or second step. I mean, we've been at this, but we need to continue this conversation and really fine tune the numbers and ask the hard, the questions on both sides and get there. Because I think we all want the same thing, but we just can't go at it not knowing the future. That was my point. We can't go at it hoping like we did 11 years ago, hoping for the best. That's obviously that didn't pay out. We all are heading in the same direction, but hope's not going to get us there. So let's continue this and continue to dig and continue the conversations.
Joe, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I did. My very first question of the night was to Gary, and it was, what changes to this bill would we want to see? What counter proposals would we have? And I didn't hear any. I heard this is all or none. We'd want to take this and this and this and this, take all of this stuff out of it, but not any changes. And Alan, you just said specifically the point I was making when I asked my questions to them. Is there room for us to negotiate? Is there room for somebody on that committee to listen to what we're saying and perhaps give us something back and do something for us so that we can be behind this bill? And I think by not asking them to stay for the meeting and stay for some of these follow-up questions so that we could try to understand the differences in the analysis that Gary has spent time doing and the analysis that they presented and where the other $200 million came from or disappeared to, it would have been nice to be able to have that conversation now. Instead, we're going to have a follow-up conversation with the same people to try to understand why the numbers aren't the same. And we can say, somebody says that it applies to munis and co-ops, somebody else says it doesn't. There's one bill, it's 900 pages long. What's it really say? And what's the end answer? We still don't know anything about how this really impacts us because we don't have a consistent set of numbers that everybody agrees to. They even started their presentation was, let's get some facts on the table so it's numbers we all agree to. And here we are 2 hours later with numbers nobody can agree to.
Well, I'm going to respond to that, Joe. I think Gary put the facts on the table, and they said they didn't agree with the facts, but they didn't really give us facts. They gave us projections. And so we asked the questions. You asked the questions, we asked the questions, and there were some answers and some were not answers. And so I get it, but keeping them here to say, well, it's what we think. I mean, I think, it's a good conversation to have, and we just get questions and say, what about this, and this? So we have a follow-up with hard questions, and we can send it to them. Mm-hmm. So when they come here and speak to us again, they can't say, well, we didn't look into that.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the best route.
That's the impacts documents that
Yes.
I'm talking about is,
So-
and if they say, oh, I think you're wrong on your math on that, cite to the legislation and show us exactly why that calculation doesn't work.
And Joe, your question about the securitization of it, they didn't have an answer for it. They said, well, and you made an excellent point. Why would we go forward without that answer?
Page 9 of their presentation talking about siege economics, how it's paid for, they've got 5 bullet points that say these don't apply to munis and co-ops.
And Gary doesn't disagree with that.
That's right.
That whole first paragraph was the first 3 bullet points that Gary presented about the coal severance fee and the community, what is it, Gary?
The Energy Community Reinvestment Program.
Community Reinvestment Program that account for this, $7 million per year beginning in 2022. And they wanted to break it into a cents per kilowatt hour, but for whatever reason, he didn't calculate that times the kilowatt hours equals.
Mm-hmm.
But as a ratepayer, I know how many kilowatt hours I use in a month, and if I see that it's a penny per kilowatt hour, and I look at my bill and I used X number of kilowatt hours, I know how much it's going to be. That to me is a straight calculation. That's easy.
But the residential isn't the only
Correct.
user in this municipality. So you've got
Right,
to
and-
look at all of the kilowatt
And
hours,
for
the
us
city.
to explain it to the people, it's going to be, we normally spend $45 million on power, and this is going to be an additional $7 million a year on top of that they're going to have to pay.
Right,
It's part of fee number one.
right.
So that they, and you bring up a good point. They nailed it down to cost per kilowatt hour. Is that a correct calculation?
I don't know.
I don't know.
No, I mean, the calculation that they have in the appendix is not correct, no.
The one that they have on page 9 of their presentation, the very first top line.
Yeah, that's the one that's referenced in the appendix.
Okay.
That's not correct.
So their 1 cent per kilowatt hour is not correct.
Well, the cap is, that's a legislative cap. That's a 1 cent per kilowatt hour. That's a legislative cap. The estimate of the half a cent per kilowatt hour for Prairie State, and then the $210 million below it, if you flip back to the appendices, and I think it's like the second or third page from the end, that's the calculation that's not correct.
So when they put a cap on it at 1 cent per kilowatt hour, I, as a ratepayer doing my budgets, whether it's a private citizen homeowner or it's a multi-million-dollar business out in the industrial park, I look and see that I'm going to have a 1 cent per kilowatt hour impact to my monthly budget. I can do that math.
And for Batavia, that's roughly $4 million a year.
But for the average ratepayer, it's 1 cent per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
What's our average user pay per kilowatt hour now?
When you total all of it up, it looks like this great big amount, $400 million.
4.3 cents per kilowatt hour, so it's not insignificant.
So Joe, just to go back to this, if it's a 1 cent different and we're only paying 4 cents today,
That's 25%.
that's 25% more.
Okay.
So that's a 25% rate increase per kilowatt hour. That's more money to our ratepayers. That does not equate to an equal line moving forward.
Right, I don't think that, I think that our residents would be up in arms if they heard that the legislation was going to increase their utility bill or their electric bill by 25%.
That's what he's saying.
But for 10 years, and then it goes
Hey,
away. That graph, that stacked
All right,
graph.
hey, Abby, let Marty speak. Marty had his hand up, please.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to get back to what are we trying to accomplish? We're getting into our disagreements about points on here, and it's not moving us forward to come to some sort of consensus about what we need to do. If we're just going to discuss and say this is correct, this is not correct, that is not. We can do this all night because that's all it's going to do. What is the end goal for? After listening to the information that was presented to us by staff and the information that was presented to us by the presenters tonight, are we wanting to do anything on this or not? Are we wanting to just digest it, think about it, or not? I don't know. I don't know what we're trying to accomplish at this point of the evening on this.
Okay, Laura?
A suggestion would be to have staff put together a list of points that establish the impacts to the city of Batavia. Once we have that together, we'd be happy to pass that along to the group that did the presentation this evening, and so that if they have any disagreement with those points, we can, try to resolve that, utilizing any additional information that they may want to provide us with. But we bring that back to you following having had that discussion with them, and they can join the discussion as well if in the end they dispute it. And at that point, maybe that would become the talking points, if you will, that then representatives from the city would meet with our state and federal legislators to say, please consider these impacts as this potentially is going to the floor for debate in May.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think with that list of what those concerns are, and then what possible mitigations would be, either changes to the law to remove things or add things, lined up with each one of those points that would affect us, I think that makes sense. Because then you're not just going in and complaining and saying, God, I don't like what you're trying to pass here. You're saying, these are the things that affect us. These are things we think, if you modified the bill, however, whichever way, would help the city and would help make this something that we would really feel good about supporting. I mean, we want to support it. We want the clean energy part of the deal, but we also don't want to drive people away and, hurt our other ratepayers that stay in the process. So I think we have to have those things very well delineated. And like I said earlier, we have to figure out, how do we get from here to there? I mean, the end goal, 2050, whatever the number is out into the future, I think pretty much everybody around here can agree on, we want to get there. It's how do we do it? And how does this legislation, if passed, help us get there, not hurt us on the way there?
Mark?
Yeah, Alan, and I know Joe asked that question. It's like, well, what are our alternatives? I know nothing about energy. I don't think the 14 of us could come up with alternatives that we would put into this legislation. We need somebody to offer those alternatives for us, to help people that are smarter than us about this. And
I think some of those alternatives are in the bill. They're just not available to us.
Well, again, to securitization, I mean, that if you read what they're talking about in the context of securitization, it's state subsidized. That's why he said access to low-cost capital. That's because it's low cost, because it's state subsidized. It's not low-cost capital like you and I are thinking that we can just get it at a great interest rate. It's subsidized by all of us. That's in their context, and we don't even know. Again, that would take. I mean, I'm not an expert, so I'm not sure what parts of the law would have to change in order to get us to that point. But I know we keep coming back to that one because Joe Napa identified that one, but it's not just like a low interest rate. It's you're asking for state subsidies.
Just like every time we talk about a grant, it's not our local tax money. Well, it is. It's still tax money from somewhere.
Still tax money from somewhere.
And the state might not, the state doesn't have any money. They're not just going to hand us money.
They do, though, under this program, because we're the ones paying for it.
Right.
On the back end.
So Lori, you'll put together something, you and Gary, you think you could be done by next Tuesday, we can do this again?
We were thinking we weren't going to meet next Tuesday because of the election.
Oh, that's right.
And I guess I don't know that I have enough direction. I don't even know if I asked the very basic question, does Batavia oppose the premature closure of Prairie State?
In the current form of this bill, I'd say yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would say yes, too.
Without...
I don't know that 14 of you say yes.
Yeah.
Gary, I think we should deliver it in this form because it's still coming back on the 13th then that's really the debate that you have on the 14th is this our position or isn't it?
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, that's essentially what you got here.
We essentially have it done there. We just need to add in maybe some of the
what we can just, I guess, it would be to have you add in whatever responses that they had that we can.
And where we disagree with.
Where we disagree with those responses, and if they're just like we said in projections or the securitization of it, we can say, well, we need something more concrete than this, just on a hope that we can do it.
Right.
There's a lot of that. Go ahead, Abby.
What?
Abby?
Yeah. My turn. When we have that impact in writing, can we please invite the presenters back today and our legislators to be part of that discussion?
It's hard with the legislators. I think it's easier to go to them to have the conversation rather than to find, when all four of our state legislators are going to be able to spend an hour with us on a Tuesday to discuss this. Their schedules are really, really tight.
So you're thinking possibly you and Gary would go and speak with them?
Yes,
Or the
certainly
mayor?
invite them, and if they can come to the meeting on the 13th, we'll be deciding upon your position, right?
Okay.
So maybe on the 20th, then we invite the legislators if they're able to attend that following meeting. Otherwise, we can go to them.
Okay. That sound good to folks? Go ahead, Keenan.
So when we come back, we're going to have, before the 14th, we'll have a list of the things that are going to impact Batavia and also suggestions of what in the law we want to see changed.
Impacts and mitigations is what I wrote down. So mitigations would be how could we change CJA that would address that impact?
Gotcha. Okay.
Hey, Mike Risotto, do you have something to say?
Yeah, no, I'm just in agreement. I think we're all for the green energy. There's a lot of things. I mean, I don't think that Prairie State would be ready to close by 2029. I do think the 2050 is maybe a realistic goal. And, you know, as far as coal, I'm looking at some of the stuff when you guys were having these discussions on Prairie State. The federal government was also discussing clean energy, and there's a plethora of failed companies on the green energy. So nobody's wrong here. I don't think nobody's wrong. Nobody's right. But the coal plants, there's such a pressure on coal. The coal plants that are closing, and one of the reasons why there's a decrease in coal power is some of these plants that are closing they were built in the 60s and 70s. I've seen Vistra Corp out of Texas owns a few coal plants in Illinois. And one was built in 72 and one was built in 78. I'm sure that it was far too much of a cost to bring those plants up to any kind of standard. And I do believe that Prairie State is above and beyond the standards of a majority of coal plants out there. To say that it's going to be closed in 2029 after 17 years, I'm having a real issue with that. And also that since we are part owners of Prairie State, I don't think we could just walk away at 2029 and there's got to be some type of repercussions. I don't know what it is, but when Prairie State does cease operations, it's just not, we're not going to be able to just leave this plant there and abandon it. Somebody's going to have to pay for something. And any way you look at it, on anything on the CJA, it's just moving around money from one taxpayer to another.
Gary.
Yeah, I think we also need to talk about roles, and I say this in the big picture. I don't believe it's appropriate for the city of Batavia to ask for something in the legislation that says we want Prairie State to start manufacturing balloons. I mean, anything related to Prairie State isn't our purview to be asking. I mean, we're technically not even an owner. We're just the power sales agreement with Nimpa. So I mean, we're 3 steps removed. So I think this Batavia threats and proposed modifications, I think is most appropriate in the context of Batavia, as far as modifications to the legislation. Now, general positions, that can be a little broader, but if we're going to put red line on a set of legislation, that needs to be in the context of Batavia. We are not in a position to offer comments or negotiate on behalf of all the 9 owners and the 244 municipalities. We're just not in that position.
Right.
What is Nimpa's position right now on this? I mean, would they be in support of addressing it before it becomes an enacted law?
Nimpa is in support of addressing it. Nimpa is one of the 9 owners, and Prairie State and the IMUA are actively lobbying, on behalf of representing municipal interests and representing Prairie State interests.
And do you feel like they have the similar interests that we do?
I don't know. I don't know what your guys' interests are at this point. So, what's that?
What are theirs?
Some of them I've incorporated right into this document, and that was the all of the above energy approach.
Right.
To say that, coal and baseload energy in general needs to remain a part of the state's mix. Prairie State's supercritical design enables it to be.
Gary, can you explain supercritical, please?
It has to do with pressures and temperatures in the boiler, and it's a boiler design that allows, despite what is said, it allows Prairie State to be very efficient in the amount of energy that comes out of a ton of coal, and on the back end, it allows Prairie State to burn coal efficiently and with the emissions controls, so that our emissions on a per megawatt basis are lower. That's the part that keeps getting ignored. Yes, we're the highest NOx emitter. We might be the highest NOx emitter, but that's because we also are the highest
Generator.
electrical, I mean, the two go hand in hand.
Right.
Anyways, proposed CEJA legislation is heavily reliant on subsidies and tax credits, which will ultimately be paid for by all Illinois ratepayers, and that's a hidden cost in this thing. And then the city-specific ones are like things like the Illinois Commerce Commission Authority, the Illinois Commerce Commission autonomy over the electric utility for renewable energy and self-generation. And I got to look up what part of the act the Electric Vehicle Act
Yeah.
is part of, if it sits on its own or if it's under one of the other acts. I mean, the language in here says residential developers shall install this, this, and this, and I mean, it's black and white. I just don't know what part of the act it applies to, but it's right in there. I mean, there's no, it's not like guidance. It's shall. So.
So Gary, not to be contrary with these gentlemen, but also Prairie State, I mean, like, as you say, they're most efficient. It's one of the newest ones. And also, don't they repurpose their ash?
Yeah,
So
we
there's
have a lot
fly
of
ash into
beneficial
concrete?
reuse. A lot of beneficial reuse from the fly ash and the gypsum. We do not haul coal from Wyoming. We haul coal literally across
We're at the mouth of the
right
mountain, right.
And there's a huge carbon savings there. So, I mean, I guess if you're asking me in the big picture, you know, as far as Nimpa and where Batavia, I hope, aligns with, is that we oppose the premature closure of Prairie State. We think Prairie State should be the last one to go because it's the newest and the cleanest. That's our general and very generic position.
Is there availability of the, you know, a stat that would show per megawatt hour generated what Prairie State puts out compared to other plants?
Yeah,
like
I wrote that down. That was one of the first things I wrote down.
Okay, is that something that I think we should know again? Because, you know, you're right. If that's, you know, the worst emitter out there, that should be the one that goes. So the plants that are the worst, the ones that were built in the 60s that they've been buying carbon credits or whatever they've done to not put any money into the plant for 50 years, those are the ones that need to be shut down now. So you get the worst offenders out. I mean, it's just like the cash for clunkers thing they did. If you take away the cars that are putting out, you know, a carburetor car that's running on 4 out of 8 cylinders, that's the worst thing out there on the road. If it's 5 years old and it's just beat to death, it's still not putting anything out of the tailpipe because it's only 5 years old. So that's the reality I'd like to see us be able to compare those with.
Alan?
Yes.
Go ahead, Abby.
I mean, that's what they said that they were doing, though. Over the next 10 years, it was going to be phased out with the oldest ones going first and the newest plants going last. And then I also just wanted to get back to the question from earlier. What's the goal by the end of tonight? Because all of the refuting of what we heard from the presentation just a little bit ago now, and just going back and forth, it again just kind of feels one-sided. I wish that they were here so that we could have these points addressed. I mean, I know you were saying that we don't want to just argue with them, but I mean, that's what we should be doing. And that's what I think the ratepayers deserve to hear. So what's the goal? What's the goal for now?
Well, I'm not going to answer.
I think what we've talked about is you put the things together that we've given to Laura and Gary. That list then goes to those presenters again. They can respond to those things and say, okay, here on page 742, it says this, and that's why this point is not right. Okay, then we can, you know, that point's gone. And then we move through those, and when we have consensus, I guess, from both sides that these are the real facts that we can move forward with, and then talk to the legislators about what the effects of those facts would do to the city, and a suggestion or any suggestions of what we think would help us or what could benefit us to move forward. You know, again, I'm not going to say we should oppose this, but I oppose it in its present form because I think there's things that really hurt us. And if we can get rid of some of those things, even if it's only half of those, then I think it's support, move forward, and adapt to it. Because I think that's the reality of how we move forward. At any point or anything we have to deal with, you have to weigh and balance those things and move in the direction that you know is the right direction. And I know that the right direction for our community, our residents, and the rest of the residents of this planet is to go that way. But, you know, I don't want to destroy the community and wipe out our industrial park in the next 10 years.
So if I can ask a question. Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, that's who these guys represent.
They
To some
represent
degree.
many organizations.
I know the League of Women's Voters, Sierra Club.
NRDC. There was no Sierra Club. No one
Well,
identifies.
one of them
from-
was and is a part of the Sierra
Is he?
Club
Okay.
also. But anyway, I mean, we don't, I fully appreciate them coming in and speaking with us, giving us their perspective. The RMI document wasn't great, but, you know, like I said, I appreciate their enthusiasm, that are getting good jobs, absolutely, clean energy. But we don't have to answer to these people, right?
No,
I mean,
but they wrote the act. Like, they helped write this act. Like,
couple of
they're
them are on the board.
an expert on the
Okay,
act.
that's what I'm asking. So they helped write the act.
They have direct input, so if you were
Okay.
to say, wow, we got a really big argument with them and they're really not going to talk to us anymore,
Well, we're not
they'll go
looking to
back
do
and they
that.
can go back to the steering committee and say, don't do anything for them. We're
No,
going to
but
pass it as is.
This is what we need for the benefit of our city. Like they said, these are talking points we can bring back to the coalition.
Right.
So that's what you guys are going to be tasked to do,
Yes.
right, Laura?
Yes.
And you'll come back to us, get the questions and send it to them and say, these are concerns brought up.
Just so everyone's clear, the coalition doesn't have any more power with the legislators than we do.
No, we do.
Right.
I mean, they're just lobbying for their side, and we're lobbying for our side, and
Yeah, but they've already got a relationship there because they've already been to those meetings. They've already been there as they've
So do we.
created this 900 pages of paper.
you know, I mean, so do we, though. I mean, Prairie State and IMUA, I mean, you may not here at
Right.
the city of Batavia,
Right.
but
But they have a much closer relationship than we here in this room do, or, you know, in this meeting do.
But wouldn't it be interesting if they agreed with our points and we went in together to the legislature and said, and they were the ones that came in and said, hey, we'd like to change a couple of things here and it supports Batavia?
Absolutely.
Be nice.
We don't
That
have
would be
to
great.
have
Would agree that would be
groups go in
nice.
and try to do something with this. Continue to work with these people and show them that we're serious and we're trying to make sure we take care of the people we're responsible for taking care of, and work with them, not against them, and we might be able to get something through that everybody likes.
That's a good point, Joe. Marty, you have something to say, please?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was wanting to say, just in agreeing with Abby on it. I know we've been saying a lot of, what certain people, one way or another, believe that is acceptable to them, but we haven't taken a vote on this. Some of the things are very acceptable to me on this legislation as is. And that's where I think we're just splitting the hairs on some of this stuff and debating it further when it kind of doesn't need to be debated, because we haven't taken a vote on what the position is. So when I hear things about, are we in a position to close it? I might be in a position to agree that 29 years might be, just based on what I believe. So that's where I think we need to kind of only stick with the lanes of the things that we have direct ability to add some input on.
Thank you.
I think we're there. I think if we get to the point where we can agree on the points we have and the suggestions we have, we can move forward with that.
All right, so I guess to Alan's point, you'll get back to us, we'll have a discussion, and then we'll go forward to these gentlemen.
Yes.
Everyone okay with that?
Wait, I thought we were going to send the points that Gary.
Right.
We are in the
first.
meantime.
And that was something that I think they made very apparent in the beginning of their presentation, was they weren't ready to respond to anything that Gary said tonight. So I think that that's also good that, the sooner we can get that to them, the better off we are.
Right.
And then we, from the people that help write the legislation can help us form opinion and move forward with that. So I feel like that's a good place that we're at. Okay.
All right, that's it for the discussion. Alan?
Okay. We will move back to the agenda, item number 9, project status.
We have projects. No.
Oh, can I just say one quick thing, though?
Yes.
Just regarding Prairie State, Gary does send out those monthly memos, and the equivalence availability factor and the net
the
capacity
efficiency?
factor are in the 90s all the time.
Exactly.
And the expectations for any unit like this, any facility like this, is like in the 80s.
Right.
In the mid-80s.
75%, they say.
And we're always in the 90s, so Prairie State is doing very well. As you know, Alan, when it first opened up, we're like, man, these guys are getting killed. It was always breaking down.
Yeah.
But they've been really very,
A lot of it was very new technology
Yep.
that they had to perfect the designs for everything that they did, especially with a boiler that was never used on that scale before.
right.
So I was just kidding. There are a few projects that I wanted to talk about. We have continued to meet with constituent groups in the area of the outdoor dining, business owners, property owners, other organizations, and we're ready to set those up next week. So you'll see South Water Street and North River Street get set up. Maura Hirschauer's office reached out to Mayor to set up an appointment to sit down and speak with the Department of Transportation about North River Street. I just wanted clarity on what we are discussing with them is why it has taken so long to process the application, if that's correct. I don't anticipate making the suggestion at that meeting that they don't have jurisdiction over the intersection.
Oh, come on, I was just going to ask for
Be
that.
clear, not that I haven't
No, just-
asked the city attorney I did ask him to go through the exercise of providing the legal opinion on
Yeah.
that matter. But while we are waiting for them to provide us with a permit, I thought maybe, to try to just reinforce that this is something that we are trying to do for the businesses in the
Yeah.
area and the economic importance of this to us. And we acknowledge that the ball is in our court right now. We had a little bit of, we've had to focus on the extreme financial impacts that the CEJA legislation may have on the city of Batavia, which in the balance between the two, Gary has had to focus his time and energy focusing on that. But we will take that up as the very next matter. But there are, as you know, Gary sent out the notes that they made on it. They're asking for a right-in, right-out on South Washington Street, not even in the area of North River Street, but due to traffic impacts. And then also, it's unclear whether they're asking for a right-in, right-out on North River Street, or if they're asking us to close the east entrance to North River Street
It looked
and
like it
create
was a
some
bump
type
out.
of extended curb bump out
Yeah,
situation.
it looked like it was a bump out and forcing the traffic to turn right.
Which then, in that iteration that you're talking about, Alderman Barron, allowed a perpendicular crosswalk to
Yes.
be put at that area.
And then
Ironically.
and that would help the bike commission with their route and everything. So
Exactly.
there's,
So there's
Just for the record,
interesting
staff
ideas
made
there.
that suggestion like a year and a half ago.
yeah.
It is going around in circles.
You probably already had it drawn up and
I
figured
think
out
because
and
they're
bid
at that
out.
point, that might be the opportunity to bring into the discussion the other crosswalk.
Yes.
Just north of that.
Right.
So then that would also have the impact that would take you further up to Washington Street, which makes sense for the right in and right out, because it could stop from the traffic turning left into that road, which could cause a backup because it's where people are turning left into the smoke place, and also that road is where cars sit. So if you have a car that's waiting to cross traffic, it causes a jam. So taking that away could help with the flow of traffic in that area.
So
Or is that conference call with Representative Hirschauer, is that tomorrow afternoon?
It's at 2 o'clock.
Okay, yeah, I recall seeing the invitation. I will be on that call as well.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, because I think that it's about traffic, it's about access to the street, but it's mainly about economic
Right.
recovery
Exactly.
and continued success. I mean, today we had another story on the 9 o'clock or 9.
Yes.
Channel 9 News this morning. They're out, I saw the truck right behind me.
Giabella?
This morning at Giabella. And as much as it's been really difficult, we've had some real success stories in this town. And we need to keep focused on that and keep working every year to make sure that that continues. And this is one of the things I think that's going to help River Street continue to be a success, continue to be busy, and continue to draw people to that area. So, I mean, we have to keep focus on that.
And I think with the development, with those little things that we would do at that intersection, that will help.
And there's a lot
people-
more going on there than just a new apartment building.
That's right. So we'll be having that conversation. At the same time, the staff group from the city and the Park District will be meeting with Hitchcock Design Group to talk about the results from their analysis phase, and then looking forward to, in April, they want to do a community survey that we'll make sure to advertise so that we can get some good participation with that. And so we'll report out on what was discussed at that meeting. The Main Street construction is set to resume. There's some daytime roadway closures are going to be required at the west end for approximately 3 weeks to facilitate the installation of the storm sewer. It is in a really tricky position where that particular storm sewer is located, and it really makes sense, rather than to drag it out over many, many, many weeks and try to take traffic from one side to the other side, to just sort of rip the Band-Aid off and get it done in these 3 weeks and have it be, beautiful new roadway after that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Gary?
No, you credit on daytime closures. That's the biggest thing.
Yes.
It's not going to be.
Have we notified the school district so they know how to
We've been in
reroute
communication
buses
with
and
the
everything?
buses.
Okay.
The buses will still be able to go through. We don't want to have every car going through, which is why we're posting it as closure.
And the police department continues to work with other governmental parties to manage the on-site security, green traffic flow at the new mass vaccination site located at the former Sam's Club. Things seem to be working exceptionally well out there, with the exception of, one day, but they quickly resolved the issue, and things have been going really smoothly ever since then. And just a public safety message, and you'll see this on the Batavia Police Department social media pages, as well as the city's social media pages, that with this warmer springtime weather, we really want to get messaging out for motorists to be on the lookout, pedestrians, bicyclists. We're all getting out more, and we want to be aware of one another and try to take each other's safety into consideration. It's a wonderful thing that year after year, more and more people spend time downtown because there's more things to do downtown. But that also means that we need to take into consideration each other and just make sure that we're being aware and staying safe.
2 words.
What's that?
Slow down.
Thank you. That's one thing I wanted to mention too. As part of our traffic calming measures, that is part of our strategic action plan, we will be renewing our Slow Down campaign here in the next few weeks. Griffin is ordering 200 additional signs, and we will invite any residents to come pick those up and post those in their yard.
I've seen them
Remind
popping up
us.
already, so I just want
Yes,
to
I did
remember.
too. The ones that you see up already are residents who have kept those signs from former iterations of the campaign, kept them nice and clean and everything, and now have gone out and reinstalled them. So we really appreciate the participation. It's a campaign that's worked well for us. I have no idea where the feedback's coming from.
No, it's terrible.
We sound like we're on an old phone.
I thought there's a fan in here going.
Yeah.
I have a question, Laura.
Yes.
Where are we at with the due diligence and the estimates for a build-out for the new public works building?
We are hoping to come back to you, because we won't have a council meeting next week, we're hoping to come back to you on the 13th.
Yes. We'll have a closed session on the 13th, give a readout of all of that.
Okay, thank you.
One quick question too. Joe Dean, moving forward.
They have provided us with and I actually didn't expect it until next week, but they have actually provided us with another draft of the agreement, and our attorney is reviewing it. I think there'll be some last changes to it, but I believe that that may be on the agenda for April 13th as well.
Anybody else? If not, I have one other. If you can't get out to Northern on Friday night, watch BATV, because we're going to be broadcasting both sophomore and varsity game, and it will be interesting. It's rivalry Geneva, so it's going to be a great game.
Yeah.
And a really neat environment when you've got, I think they're going to have both sides of the stands open, so everybody will be able to spread out. Normally you'd have 25,000 people there, so there'll be a ton of room. And hey, the last time we were there, we won a state title, so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a great venue for the kids to play in. It's really cool.
Alan, did you say others?
Yes, I have other. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have another for, as it relates to 907 West Wilson, which is Windmill Countertop. Mark and Sharon over there are just great Batavians, and they really have a prime location. As I'm sure a lot of you know, they really decorate that corner and have a lot of pride in their business. They are going through a little bit of some issues with the outdoor storage. They received some citations for the outdoor storage and the maneuvering on trailers, so on and so forth. And I met with him tonight, and we kind of went over the area. And I would like to, at a future date, have him come in and just discuss what some of the issues he has as it relates to outdoor display, outdoor storage, and maybe possibly be seeing if there are anything that we can do within our zoning to do any modifications, not for one person or business, but are there opportunities that we may have to review our zoning, and is it consistent with other types of businesses that have outdoor display, outdoor inventory, etc. So, and if another joint alderman would join me, I would just ask Mark and Sharon to maybe come to another meeting. Looks like maybe late. And if it can't be done soon, obviously, maybe somebody else can take up the cause if I'm gone.
I'll join you, Marty.
I'll join you, Marty.
Thank you.
And we'll follow up on it if it happens after you're gone.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Mike DeSoto has a comment.
Mike, you want to say something? Mike, you're muted.
Yeah, no, I didn't raise my hand or anything.
Oh, got a little hand sticking up there.
Oh, do I? Raised by mistake.
Before we get overtaken by whatever this
Jack, whatever's going on.
in this room.
I move we adjourn.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.